Chapter 551. When it came to Jiangnan's water towns, people would often think of the clear, misty background that resembled an ink wash painting, the continuous rippling river, and the small courtyard with its white walls and black roof tiles. Those were the memories of the old town in Jiangnan's poetry and paintings. However, with the advancement of modernity, not many of these old towns remained. The paths paved with limestone had already been turned into straight and flat concrete roads, and the black canopies had long been replaced by beetle-like cars. If one wanted to find traces of Jiangnan, they would have to go to the parks or scenic spots that were specially set up for tourists. Perhaps those were the only remaining symbols of status in the large cities that were similar with only minor differences. On this day, a girl in a white dress rode a large bicycle along the riverside path. The park's gatekeeper had been waiting there for a long time. When he saw her coming, he smiled and opened the gate. The girl got off the bicycle and politely bowed in greeting. Her white jade fingers gently parted her long hair and tucked it behind her ears, revealing an exquisite face that could make 100 flowers pale in comparison. Her cold brows and faint worried expression made people feel pity for her, but they didn't dare to approach her. Needless to say, this was Duan Xueqing, who had left Yangcheng for a long time. After Duan Xueqing returned to her hometown, she didn't continue to look for a job, but stayed at home. Mother Duan could tell that her daughter was hurt, but she didn't ask too much, giving her time and space to slowly think things through. After Duan Xueqing returned, her favorite thing to do was to go to the old district park near her home to read. For the past few months, regardless of rain or shine, she would ride her old Phoenix brand bicycle there. There was a tea house in the park that faced the river. It was an old-fashioned tea house with square tables and large bowls of tea. Because of the old generation's famous opera masters, it attracted many local elegant guests. There were also some tourists who came because of the tea house's reputation, so the tea house was always full and there wasn't even a seat to be found. However, Duan Xueqing wasn't worried about not having a seat. Because this tea house was also owned by her family, there was a private room that faced the river that was always reserved for her. There was a faint sandalwood fragrance in the room. It was not as strong as the usual incense, and even the mellow fragrance of the tea could not cover it. It was just that it silently diffused in the room, making people feel relaxed and happy. The rising smoke dotted the simple calligraphy and paintings on the wall, making one feel as if they had returned to the golden age of the great Tang when they met friends through poetry. Duan Xueqing didn't need other people's service. She boiled water and made tea by herself. Then, she sat by the window of Wangjiang and flipped through the pages. Following the ivory bookmark, she found the place where she read last time. She took a sip of tea and continued reading. Duan Xueqing brought a few books with different genres. There was a newly published romance novel in China, an English version of the German writer Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis, and a Spanish-language original novel by Fernando Cantor. Fernando Caballero's The Seagull. The book in her hands was a translation theory book. This book introduced the more mainstream functional translation theory in China. The author was Chen Zongdai, her dean, and Poplar Fruit's current mentor. Reading this book, Duan Xueqing's heart was not calm. This could be seen from her slightly trembling hands. It was also not easy to forget a person who had been secretly in love with her for several years. Duan Xueqing left Yangcheng for several months and did not take the initiative to contact Poplar Fruit. Only Poplar Fruit called her a few times, and she did not follow Poplar Fruit's Weibo. However, that person seemed to be deeply rooted in her heart, jumping out from time to time to disturb her calm thoughts. When reading the translation theory book, Duan Xueqing would think of Poplar Fruit. At that time, she did not know where the sadness and bitterness in her heart came from. She felt very uncomfortable and helpless. In fact, Duan Xueqing was also suffering from her own actions. She could have thrown these books away and stopped thinking about reading them, but she could not bear to. It was as if she was addicted to self-abuse. Every day, she would pick up the books and read 2 pages, letting the throbbing pain spread throughout her body. Unknowingly, it was as if red plum blossoms had bloomed in the snowy world. Duan Xueqing's snow-white skin flushed red, and her eyes became slightly red. Her originally ethereal and beautiful eyes were covered with a thin layer of mist. Suddenly, a clear voice called out from outside the window, interrupting Duan Xueqing's chaotic thoughts. Duan Xueqing quickly rubbed her eyes, gently wiped away the tears with her slender ring finger on her left hand, and looked out the window. Outside, there was a tall figure standing on the embankment by the river, waving at her. It was that man. Duan Xueqing looked at him with some surprise. Duan Xueqing had seen the man in a black casual shirt before. 2 days ago, Duan Xueqing was sitting in the private room reading books. He had walked in by mistake. Although she was a little frightened, his good manners and polite apology had left a good impression on Duan Xueqing. The man did not pester her too much. He did not even deliberately ask for Duan Xueqing's contact information because of her beauty. After apologizing, he left. Duan Xueqing had a very good memory. Even if her memory was not good, she did not know many people, but she still remembered this rude but polite man. Therefore, when she turned to look out the window, Duan Xueqing recognized him at a glance. However, Duan Xueqing was not surprised because she recognized him. The place where the man was standing was rarely visited by people. Behind the tea house were bushes, and further back was the wide river. The only place to rest was the long and narrow embankment. It was only enough for one to rest on because it was not wide enough for one to step on. If one was not careful, it was very likely that one would miss a step and fall into the water. Don't stand there, it's dangerous. Duan Xueqing anxiously waved at him, and then motioned for him to come down from the embankment. The man saw Duan Xueqing waving at him and was very happy. She did not know if he understood Duan Xueqing's gesture, but he made an okay gesture to Duan Xueqing from afar. Then, he slowly moved down the embankment, trotted all the way, and soon disappeared without a trace. Duan Xueqing was a little confused. However, she was a very cold person, so she did not mind. She turned around, put down the translation theory book in her hand, and picked up the original Spanish novel, The Seagull, that was placed at the top of the stack. She quietly flipped through it. After a few minutes, there was a sudden noise outside the door. "Sir, this is a private room. You can't go in." The voice of the tea house waiter came in. "I know." A slightly magnetic and gentle male voice also sounded. "Ha, don't worry, I know the owner inside. She asked me to come." "Well, how about this, you open the door and ask. If it's not her, I'll leave without saying anything. I won't trouble you. Don't worry." Although he was not necessarily a local, he should be from Jiangnan. Wu Nong's accent was very pure, and it sounded very friendly and not abrupt. He deliberately lowered his voice, as if he was afraid of disturbing the silence of the room. Just like himself, he was polite and well-mannered. Chapter 552. The voice outside paused for a moment, as if hesitating. Then the waiter knocked on the door, breaking the silence of the room once again. Duan Xueqing's brows were already wrinkled. She was silent for a long time. The second knock on the door sounded. This might be the waiter's last attempt. Duan Xueqing was the family of the tea house's boss. In other words, she was someone who could control her career. She didn't have the guts to open the door and enter without permission. Duan Xueqing slowly stood up and walked up to open the door of the private room. The smiling face of the man outside was the first thing that came into view. He was very handsome. Whether it was his height or appearance, he met the aesthetic standards of Chinese women. Especially his smile, it always gave people a feeling of sunshine. It was the complete opposite of Duan Xueqing, the ice beauty's temperament. He wore a very well-ironed black shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Casual trousers with heavy hiking boots. There was a sense of unruliness in the seriousness. freedom and self-control coexisted. "Hello." The man politely raised his right hand and greeted her with a smile. "Miss, this gentleman said that you asked him to come." The waiter looked at Duan Xueqing's face nervously and said, "That's right." The corners of the man's mouth curved upwards, revealing his white teeth as he chuckled. "It's your head," Duan Xueqing thought gloomily. She was just worried that he would accidentally step on the wrong place and fall into the water. In the end, this person actually mistakenly thought that she asked him to come up. She wanted to tell the truth, but Duan Xueqing looked at his bright smile and couldn't bear to. Men were all prideful. Duan Xueqing heard her mother often say this. If she exposed him on the spot, how embarrassed would he be? Duan Xueqing nodded. Then, she hesitated and said lightly, "Come in." After saying that, Duan Xueqing turned and walked to her seat. "Thank you." Before the man came in, he bowed to the waitress and thanked her. Then, he strode in and closed the door behind him. He was a little too familiar, sitting directly opposite Duan Xueqing and chuckling. In fact, Duan Xueqing wanted him to come in and sit for a while. Later, she would find an excuse to send him away. However, the man didn't act according to common sense. He didn't speak. He just looked at her and smiled. Duan Xueqing felt a little uncomfortable. She put down the book in her hand, frowned and asked, "What are you laughing at?" "I say, we can be considered friends from an exchange of blows, right?" The man was still smiling. He made a gesture to ask if Duan Xueqing would allow him to pour the tea. Duan Xueqing took 2 deep breaths and nodded. Then, she looked at the man in front of her who was skillfully washing the cups and making tea and said, "Don't misunderstand. I just told you not to stand on it. It's dangerous." "Oh. Is that so?" The man looked a little embarrassed, but then he laughed heartily. "Then I'm rude again. Sorry. If I've disturbed you, I'll leave now." He sat there with no intention of leaving. Duan Xueqing's expression was cold, but she wasn't heartless. She picked up the book in her hand and continued to read. She didn't even raise her head as she lightly said a few words, "No need, drink tea." As usual, she cherished her words like gold. The man didn't feel embarrassed at all. He just continued to make tea. Then, he poured the tea in Duan Xueqing's cup, poured a new cup, and pushed it to her. Duan Xueqing didn't refuse. When she flipped the pages, she glanced at him calmly. Then, she reached out her left hand, pinched the purple sand teacup with her thumb and index finger, and drank it in one gulp. She didn't comment. She just acted as if nothing had happened. She put down the cup and continued to read the book in her hand. The man was calmer than her. After pouring Duan Xueqing a new cup of tea, he poured it for himself and drank it. The private room was as quiet as before. Only the sound of the teacup being placed down could be heard, but it wasn't very abrupt. Duan Xueqing almost forgot that the man in front of her was there. It seemed like she was still sitting alone in the private room, but the tea was automatically refilled. It was too quiet. It was so quiet that it was a little strange. She didn't know why, but this man was different from other men. He didn't take the initiative to talk to Duan Xueqing, and he didn't feel uncomfortable because of Duan Xueqing's disregard. It was like he was another owner of the private room. He boiled the water and made the tea himself. His movements were so smooth and natural that he looked like a master who had been immersed in the art of tea for many years. If you looked at him slowly and didn't look anxious at all, you might even mistake him for a master. Only when the water was boiling did the man raise his head with a chuckle. He didn't disturb her and only gazed gently at Duan Xueqing's cold and beautiful face. This gaze didn't cause much trouble for Duan Xueqing because the man in front of her didn't look at her like he was looking at a beautiful member of the opposite sex. Instead, he looked at her as if she was a work of art. Every curve of her body was exquisite and delicate. He had to study her carefully to appreciate her soul-stirring beauty. Since it didn't affect her, Duan Xueqing treated the man in front of her as if he didn't exist. She didn't need to think about how to chase him away. In any case, his tea brewing skills weren't bad, so she didn't have to do it herself. Duan Xueqing usually only stayed in the tea house for the morning. She still had to go home for lunch. Although Duan Xueqing's mother basically didn't cook and the nanny did the cooking, she still wanted to spend more time with her mother after she came back. She wanted to make up for being unfilial when she insisted on working in Yangcheng. At 11:30, Duan Xueqing closed the books in her hands and began to pack her things. It wasn't much, just 4 books stuffed into her backpack. "You're going back?" The man stood up and stretched. The corners of his mouth curled up, revealing his signature sunny smile. Duan Xueqing glanced at him and didn't say anything. She just nodded. Okay, I'm going back too." "Thank you for your hospitality today," the man said with a smile. Duan Xueqing was almost 1.7 meters tall, which was considered tall for a girl. The man was only half a head taller than her, but it was enough for him to look down on Duan Xueqing. What hospitality? Duan Xueqing didn't even think about entertaining him. However, with Duan Xueqing's character, she didn't argue. She just calmly carried her bag. "Oh, I remember now." The man patted his head as if he really forgot. He smiled and said, "I haven't introduced myself yet. My surname is Bai, and my name is Pai Dinwan. I'm a wedding photographer." "Oh, right, Ting is the Ting from the imperial court, and Yuan is Yuan Fang. What do you think of Yuan?" "Ha!" As he said that, he laughed happily to himself. Duan Xueqing didn't laugh. She wasn't that easily amused. However, she didn't continue to be aloof and just said her name calmly, Duan Xueqing. Duan Xueqing didn't really like this man, but she didn't hate him. She kept a certain distance and didn't reject him. After that, Duan Xueqing did not say another word, nor did she pay any attention to him. She walked past Pai Din One lightly, leaving only a light minty fragrance. Chapter 553. In the past few days, poplar fruit had been competing with the Miaodao. The training of cold weapons and martial arts could be said to be two different things. When poplar fruit practiced the knife, it was almost like turning a page and starting from scratch. Every morning, after poplar fruit practiced 2 sets of martial arts by himself, he would practice the knife under Xiong Kahu's guidance. With poplar fruit's super memory, he quickly memorized all the moves, but memorizing them was one thing, and whether he could use them smoothly was another. In addition to the moves, Xiong Kahu also asked poplar fruit to swing the 2 knives through the bushes, but the blades must not hurt a single leaf. In the beginning, poplar fruit was like a lawnmower. Wherever he went, flowers would wither and willows would wither. It was very frightening. This was also a sign that he did not have enough control. After all, poplar fruit was not proficient yet. He could not be like Xiong Kahu, where the 2 Miaodao were like an extension of his limbs. He could stab, chop, lift, and pick as he pleased. In order to be able to smoothly control these 2 brand new long weapons, poplar fruit could be said to be inseparable from the knives. Other than eating, sleeping, and hugging Kiki, he had to hold the 2 Miaodao in practice. Of course, in the Hmong village, he would lock the blades with scabbards, a real padlock, in case he accidentally hurt the children. Fortunately, the people of Xiong village turned a blind eye to the action of carrying knives with him, and did not cause a crowd because of poplar fruit's obsession. "Papa, let Kiki play." When Kiki saw her father's 2 new toys, she immediately ran over excitedly and reached out her little hand to take them. "You can't carry them." Poplar fruit laughed. "Oh, Kiki wants to play." Kiki shook her little butt and said coquettishly. This little fellow really wouldn't turn back until he hit the southern wall. Poplar Fruit had no choice but to squat down and carefully place a Meowdao on the ground, motioning for Kiki to take it. Kiki excitedly walked to the side of the Meowdao, but she was still not satisfied. She looked up and pointed at the other Meowdao in her father's left hand. Poplar Fruit pinched Kiki's chubby cheeks, feeling both angry and amused at the same time. He put on a stern face and threatened her, "Just one. We'll see if you can carry it." Humph humph. Kiki pouted her little mouth and snorted proudly. She stuck out her little butt and squatted down. These two Meowdao were picked out by Poplar Fruit from Xiongkahu's armory. They were made of high-quality patterned steel that had been hammered and folded hundreds of times. They were 1.6 meters in length and weighed up to 4 kilograms without including the scabbard. Moreover, this was only the weight of one Meowdao. This was something that other Meowdao could not compare to. With such a weight, even Xiongkahu would find it difficult to carry it. It was not that he could not lift it, but that it was not practical in actual combat. However, who asked Poplar Fruit to be a freak? With his strength that went against science, the weight of these two Meowdao was only just up to the standard. The other Meowdao that were about 2 kilograms were a little light in Poplar Fruit's hands. It felt as if he was holding a bamboo pole, uncomfortable. There was no need to guess. Kiki would definitely not be able to lift such a heavy Meowdao. Therefore, Poplar Fruit amusedly hung his right hand behind Kiki's butt. His other hand was also ready to go. He was ready to hold Kiki's little butt with one hand and catch the Meowdao with the other when Kiki let go. Yaya. Kiki half squatted, her two little hands hugging the handle of the Meowdao. She used all her strength to lift it up. However, he only heard her shout loudly and did not see any signs of the Meowdao being lifted. "I told you can't lift it, right?" Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "You'll be able to lift it when you grow up." Kiki turned a deaf ear. She pouted and stood up, her cute little face showing a very unconvinced look. Poplar Fruit looked on in surprise. The little guy actually twisted her little butt, spread her legs, and got into a decent horse stance. What was going on? Poplar Fruit had n number of question marks in his heart. Could it be that during the previous journey, Poplar Fruit took Kiki to train, and Kiki learned it while watching from the side? "Hey!" Kiki called out in a childish voice. She lowered her waist and hugged the handle of the Meowdao with her two little hands again. Two Meowdaos that were as long as Kiki shook on the ground and were actually lifted up by Kiki. Of course, this was just lifting it up. Kiki's strength exploded and lifted the Meowdao to her chest. In just 2 seconds, Kiki could not hold on anymore. Her body swayed and fell back with a loud bang. Goldie, who was shaking his head and watching from the side, was so scared that he jumped up with his tail between his legs. Although Poplar Fruit was very surprised, he still caught Kiki quickly. His left hand also held the Meowdao that almost hit Kiki. After a while, Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter and was speechless. This was already a miracle. One had to know that Kiki was not even 1 year and 4 months old. Kiki grew up on milk powder, but her physical fitness was very good. She was taller and smarter than children her age, but this could not hide the fact that she was young. Besides, even a 3 or 4-year-old child might not be able to lift a Meowdao that weighed nearly 9 kilograms including the scabbard. Oh! Kiki was not excited at all. In her opinion, not being able to pick it up was a failure. She snuggled in her father's arms, the index fingers of her two little hands pressed together, and lowered her head unhappily. Kiki is already very powerful. Poplar Fruit smiled and touched Kiki's little head. He threw the two Meowdaos aside, hugged his daughter and comforted her. "When Daddy was your age, I couldn't even pick up a small knife. When you grow up in the future, your strength will also slowly increase." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "When the time comes, not to mention this knife, Daddy will let you play with anything Kiki wants to play with. But, Kiki also wants to be like Daddy, to become very, very powerful." Chi-Chi waved her small fists in a heroic manner and mimicked the Xingyi fist's forward punch. Although it wasn't a standard move, it was still somewhat similar. Poplar Fruit had an idea. He smiled and asked, "Then, Kiki, can you exercise with Daddy in the morning?" "Okay." Kiki blinked her big bright eyes and answered in a daze. Poplar Fruit had such a plan for a long time. His kung fu was already good enough to open the door and take in disciples, but he did not have this intention. He only wanted to wait for Kiki to grow up a little and teach her all the kung fu he knew. Now was a good opportunity, so Poplar Fruit took the opportunity to bring it up. Of course, Poplar Fruit did not expect a 1-year-old child like Kiki to have much perseverance to learn kung fu. He did not even expect Kiki to be able to get up early. It was unrealistic. What Poplar Fruit wanted was to be able to take Kiki to exercise so that she could maintain good physical fitness and not get sick. That was the biggest wish of a father. It's not very appropriate to teach her Tai Chi or Xing Yi Quan directly. Poplar Fruit pondered in his heart. Taekwondo and those are from other countries. It will be awkward for me to let Kiki learn them. What should I teach her? Poplar Fruit looked at Kiki, who was happily playing with the children of Meng village in front of him, and was lost in thought. Chapter 554. Poplar Fruit was very miserable. These few days, he had added a new training content, carving. Holding a 1.6-meter-long Miaodao that weighed 4 kilograms while competing with a small and exquisite piece of wood, this image was very strange no matter how one looked at it. Xiong Kahu's understanding of the Miaodao didn't just treat it as a sharp weapon to charge and break through enemy lines. Through his own unique understanding and innovation, when the Miaodao was used to the realm of his heart's desire, it could also appear and disappear like a ghost, like a dagger, making it impossible for people to guard against. During that difficult period of Nanjiang's war, their agile reconnaissance battalion soldiers often had to penetrate deep into the enemy's rear to carry out beheading operations. Xiong Kahu, who insisted on carrying his 2 Miaodao, finally figured out a new way of doing things. The long blade displayed the agility and cunning of the short blade. Just based on this alone, if Xiong Kahu lived in the old era, he could be considered a grandmaster of his generation who founded a sect. Poplar Fruit's progress was very fast. After all, control of muscles and strength was his forte. As long as Xiong Kahu taught him the trick, Poplar Fruit would quickly master it through a comprehensive study. When a student was outstanding, the teacher would be very happy. But when the student was too outstanding, the teacher would instead feel disappointed. Xiong Kahu's mood was very complicated. Seeing Poplar Fruit learn so fast, and thinking about how he used 2 years to master it and 5 years to be praised as a genius by the old ancestor, there was no need to mention that kind of depressed feeling. However, being good at using a knife didn't mean that one could carve well. Poplar Fruit was jokingly called lacking in artistic cells by his friends since he was young. Not only was it reflected in music, but he also had no talent in art. Ugly melon cracked jujube, this word was best used to describe Poplar Fruit's work. He tossed and turned for half a day with Goldie as the model. In the end, it looked like a big head with a thick neck and a short tail like a pig. Goldie glanced at it and even shook its tail disdainfully. At first, Xiong Kahu was still a little depressed, but when he saw Poplar Fruit's work, he laughed loudly, clasped his hands behind his back, and went back proudly. A ruler has its shortcomings, and an inch has its strengths. From another perspective, Poplar Fruit's talent in martial arts was nothing to be envious of. Just as he was about to throw the Poplar Fruit away, he was intercepted by Kiki, who had just returned from playing with Sister Xiaolin. "Wow!" Kiki exclaimed as if she had discovered a new continent. Then, a few syllables came out of her mouth. "Say what?" Poplar Fruit realized that he didn't understand, so he asked in confusion. Kiki said it's nice. Xiong Xiaolin translated for Poplar Fruit. This little fellow had unknowingly learned so much of the Miao language. Poplar Fruit scratched his head. Kiki had really surpassed her master. No, I have to learn the meow language as soon as possible. I can't lose to the little fellow. Papa. When Kiki saw her father turn his head to look at Sister Xiaolin, she became nervous. She was afraid that this wooden carving would fall into his hands. Poplar Fruit came back to his senses. He looked at the ugly wooden carving in his hand and asked Kiki, "Do you want it?" "Yes, yes." Kiki nodded vigorously, and then stretched out her hand high. Pink hearts were about to jump out of her big eyes. The little piggy is so cute. Kiki likes it so much. Poplar Fruit's face darkened. What little piggy? This is a dog, okay. Poplar Fruit naturally couldn't be an accomplice. He gently corrected her, this is a little dog. Papa carved it according to gold. It's too ugly. Next time, Papa will carve a beautiful one for you. Papa, you're lying. Kiki pointed at the wooden carving and shouted loudly, it's obviously a little piggy. Well, if you say it's a little piggy, then it's a little piggy. Poplar Fruit had no choice but to say, this time it's not good. Next time, when Papa is skilled, Papa will carve whatever Kiki wants for you, okay? Generally speaking, many children were easily coaxed by some beautiful illusions. This was also why so many children were attracted by the fairy tales of the candy house, and why so many my daughter believed that the uncle would really take them to see the goldfish. However, Kiki was not an ordinary child. She had her eyes on the wooden carving in her father's hand, and she firmly wanted it. Immediately, Chi-Chi burst into tears. Her voice was choked with sobs, and she complained in an aggrieved tone, Chi-Chi just wants a little piggy. Why won't Papa give it to Kiki? Does Papa not like Kiki anymore? According to past experience, Kiki would fall to the ground and cry until Poplar Fruit had no choice but to give in. However, the environment today was not good. The Hmong village was not like the city, where the ground was either cement or shiny tiles. Kiki was very clean. Today, she was wearing her favorite pink dress. She did not want to sit on the ground that was full of mud, for fear that her little dress would be stained. Poplar Fruit had a headache when he saw Kiki squatting on the ground and wiping her pitiful tears. He sighed, squatted in front of Kiki with the wooden carving, and said, well, Papa will give it to you. In fact, it was not a big deal, but Poplar Fruit did not like the first wooden carving he made. It was not only ugly, but also had many knife marks. It was only then that Chi-Chi smiled through her tears. Of course, the wooden carving could not be directly given to Kiki, because there were many small but prickly wooden thorns in the cut. Poplar Fruit was very careful when he took it, so it was not easy to prick it. However, Kiki did not know much about it, and Poplar Fruit was afraid that she would cut her hand and bleed. Poplar Fruit found a piece of sandpaper, sat on the stairs of the wooden building, and carefully polished the wooden carving. Kiki did not run out to play at this time. She ran back to the room, took out a plastic bag from somewhere, and carefully put it on the stairs. Then, she sat beside her father and watched. Why does Kiki want this? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile while polishing it, when we were shopping in the past, there were many more beautiful and cuter things, but I didn't see you want it so much. Because this was made by Papa. Kiki stared at her father's movements, and answered without thinking. Poplar Fruit's hand movements stopped, he turned his head to look at Kiki, who was sitting there very devoutly, and his face suddenly bloomed with a satisfied smile. Perhaps so. The things made by Dad are the most precious. However, Poplar Fruit still made up his mind to learn how to carve, and then make a truly beautiful wooden carving by hand for Kiki. That's right. Poplar Fruit's eyes lit up as he rubbed the wooden carving, and he muttered in his heart, in a few days, it will be Yujia's birthday. He was having a headache about what to give her. How about giving her a wooden carving that he made himself? There was still nearly a week left, and during the time on the way to the delivery, Poplar Fruit still had 3 or 4 days to learn. That was enough. Chapter 555. Early in the morning, it was drizzling, but there were still a lot of people in the park. This continuous rainy season was also a symbol of Jiangnan. In other words, compared to a sunny day, Jiangnan was more charming when it rained. Many tourists were willing to pay far more than the value of the items to buy an oil paper umbrella. Walking on the bridge by the river, they felt the poetic and picturesque scenery of the rain. Duan Xueqing didn't ride her bike today. She still held an umbrella and went to the tea house to read. Her long skirt fluttered, and the faint color gradually changed from top to bottom. When it reached the hem, the rippling green was rich like a luxuriant grass. After all, her family was in the fashion industry, although it was just a shop that sold clothes. Duan Xueqing's clothes looked very simple, but they were definitely not ordinary cheap goods. Whether it was the design or the materials used, it was impossible to buy one without 1,000 or 800 yuan. However, clothes were only a foil. No matter how beautiful the clothes were, if there was no eye for matching and a suitable figure, then no matter how beautiful the clothes were, it was useless. Duan Xueqing happened to meet both conditions. Although the umbrella covered most of her face and she was not as stunning as a flower, her tall figure and flowing long hair attracted the eyes of people along the way. No one was willing to make a sound to disturb her, because the girl in front of them was like the girl holding an oil paper umbrella in Mr. Dai Wangshu's poem. She has the same color as a lilac, the same fragrance as a lilac, the same sorrow as a lilac. Meeting her in the rainy alleys of Jiangnan was like a dream. Dreams were beautiful, but also fragile. No one dared or was willing to break this dream. They could only silently stand and watch. She floated like a dream, sad and confused like a dream. After entering the tea house, she put down the umbrella and greeted the shopkeeper's uncle. Duan Xueqing carried her small school bag and went upstairs to her private room. She still made her own tea. Duan Xueqing loved the transparent glass teapot and purple sand teacups. This combination was a bit strange, but it didn't matter. It was fine as long as she liked it. The first-class Westlake Longjing tea was soaked in hot water in the glass teapot. The stretch of each tea leaf could be seen clearly. Sometimes, drinking tea is a state of mind. Duan Xueqing deeply agreed with this saying. Every time she watched the Longjing tea slowly unfold in the glass teapot and then fall silent, the delicate green leaves and the tender yellow tea soup were still so clear that one could see through the heart of the person drinking the tea. The world could actually be so simple without the disturbance of the mortal world. She flipped open the book. The mark of the bookmark was still there, but the pain seemed to have lessened a lot. Duan Xueqing took a sip of tea and looked at it quietly. She had not seen the man for 2 days. He had not been seen since the day he had clumsily run up to her and left. It was like throwing a small stone into a vast ocean, unable to cause even the slightest ripple. Duan Xueqing also did not think of him again. It was like he was just a passerby in her life who had accidentally bumped into her shoulder. She was still the same as before. However, things in the world were always unpredictable. The person you thought would unswervingly accompany you for the rest of your life might suddenly get off the car and leave halfway. It was not impossible for that passerby to appear again in your life at some point in the future. There was no need for the future. Miss Duan. Hi. A familiar voice suddenly penetrated the curtain of rain and came in. Duan Xueqing frowned. She was engrossed in reading, so it did not feel good to be interrupted. She subconsciously looked out the window at the source of the sound. It was him. That man, what was his name again? It seemed to be surnamed Bai, the same as her favorite color. Right, his name was Pai Din 1. Duan Xueqing stared at the guy standing on the dam for a while before she remembered the name of this passerby. It was quite funny. Pai Din 1 carefully stood on the dam that was slippery due to the rain. In order to balance his body, he opened his arms, which caused the umbrella that was originally covering his head to tilt to one side. Hi. Pai Din 1 smiled brightly. You're really here. Duan Xueqing looked at his tottering appearance and frowned slightly. She did not want to shout, but she was afraid that the other party would not be able to hear her due to the loud rain. She could only gesture and say, "Be careful, come down." After making a mistake last time, Pai Dinwan did not misunderstand Duan Xueqing's meaning this time. He laughed loudly and said, "Right away, right away. I just wanted to see if you were here." "Right, do you mind if I come up and drink tea with you?" "Drink tea?" If he wanted to drink tea, there were many seats in the tea house. Not to mention the main hall, there were many private rooms on the second floor that were open to the public besides Duan Xueqing's room. The rain was not heavy, but the falling rain still wet Pai Dinwan's hair. Duan Xueqing hesitated for a while, but finally nodded. This was the second time that Pai Dinwan came here, so he seemed to be much more familiar with the place. After entering, Pai Dinwan did not hurry to sit down. He stood at the door, took out a tissue from his pocket, and wiped the rain on his forehead and cheeks. After he was done, he sat down opposite Duan Xueqing. Just like last time, Duan Xueqing was reading the book in her hand the whole time, and she did not even raise her head. Pai Dinwan did not say anything. He simply said, "It's raining, so there's no one to take wedding photos. We can rest for the day." Duan Xueqing raised her head this time and looked at Pai Dinwan. The man was still smiling brightly. For the first time, Duan Xueqing did not show any annoyance at being disturbed. Duan Xueqing was a woman of few words. She was not even willing to say a word. She looked down at the tea table, as if there was something on the tea table that attracted her more. Pai Dinwan smiled and said, "I thought you wouldn't come today, so I went outside to take a look. I didn't expect you to really be here." "Yes, the Longjing tea here is the most authentic I have ever tried." Pai Dinwan gave her a thumbs up and said with a smile, "You don't know, but after drinking tea here once, I felt that the tea I drank here was not right." Duan Xueqing didn't reply. She sat there quietly. Unknowingly, she had stretched out her right hand, revealing a smooth, jade-white arm under the sleeve of her white dress. She did not say anything and gently pushed her empty teacup forward. Then, she took it back as if nothing had happened. Pai Dinwan understood her meaning. He looked at the purple sand teacup, which was also a high-end product, and laughed. Without saying anything, he rolled up his sleeves and picked up another teapot to boil water. He skillfully washed the tea and brewed it again. After pouring away the first batch of tea, he poured the second batch of tea for Duan Xueqing. Then, he gently pushed the teacup in Duan Xueqing's direction. Without looking, Duan Xueqing picked up the teacup with one hand, opened her red lips, and took a small sip. Then, she drank it all in one gulp without making any comments. Chapter 556. Third watch. Today, Pai Dinwan came prepared. He took out a book from the plastic bag beside him and began to read it happily like Duan Xueqing. However, he was not as focused as Duan Xueqing. He flipped through 2 pages, then wriggled his body to the coffee table to make tea. One thing was for sure, and that was that the room fell into an extremely boring silence again. Even the sound of the small fire on the stove swaying in the wind could be heard clearly. "Now I know why you like to read in the tea house," Pai Dinwan said with a chuckle when Duan Xueqing stopped to drink tea. Duan Xueqing raised her head and glanced at him, but didn't reply. Calm your mind." Pai Dinwan touched his left chest with his right hand and said, "The noise outside can't reach inside. There's incense inside, and there's tea to drink. I feel like I'm back in ancient times, sailing on the West Lake, standing with my hands behind my back and reciting poems." That was also very relaxing. Pai Dinwan's voice was a little magnetic and very pleasant to the ear. Although his literary talent was not very good, there was always a vivid image floating in front of the eyes after he spoke. Duan Xueqing was silent. She lowered her head and drank the remaining tea in the cup. She did not let Pai Din 1 add more. She shrank back to her seat and continued to read. This kind of indifference would make a man very uncomfortable. What Pai Din 1 said just now was like a punch to the air. This was also Duan Xueqing's personality. She used to be like this when she was in school, but she was not so cold and distant. There was also a history here. When Duan Xueqing first entered the school, she was very cold because she was shy. As her senior, Poplar Fruit welcomed her and took her to participate in many club activities, which made Duan Xueqing's character a little more cheerful. Although she wouldn't take the initiative to talk to people she wasn't familiar with, she wouldn't ignore people who talked to her. However, after returning from Yangqing City, Duan Xueqing seemed to have closed her heart even more. Not only was she unwilling to talk to outsiders, but she was also unwilling to talk to her family members. It was as cold as a piece of polar ice, making people not dare to approach it. Pai Din 1 didn't feel embarrassed like other men. He just thought that he was talking to himself. He smiled and continued to read his book. After an unknown amount of time, Pai Din 1 began to absent-mindedly glance at the scenery outside. If it wasn't for the fact that the person in the room was as beautiful as a flower and he couldn't stop looking at her, then the misty river outside due to the rain would definitely capture the hearts of all men who loved photography. Turning around, Pai Din 1 saw Duan Xueqing put down her book and straighten her skirt as she stood up. Leaving so early? Pai Din 1 asked in surprise. It wasn't even 10:00 yet. Pai Din 1 remembered that Duan Xueqing went back at noon last time. Duan Xueqing stood and looked down at him. However, those beautiful eyes didn't reveal any emotions, and it was impossible for them to give off a dignified feeling. Pai Din 1 blinked innocently. Duan Xueqing's eyes moved and seemed to be a little different from before. She turned her head and walked out. Only a soft voice could be heard as her hair fluttered in the wind. Bathroom. Pai Din 1 didn't see that Duan Xueqing's neck, which was as white as jade, had turned her head away. When Duan Xueqing returned, she regained her calm and tranquil state. At this time, Pai Din 1 was boiling water again to make tea. Duan Xueqing pressed the corner of her skirt and sat down again. She didn't pay attention to what Pai Din 1 was talking to himself again. Instead, she reached out to the book that she had just put down. Duan Xueqing's black eyebrows slightly raised and her eyes coldly looked at the cover of the book. However, her eyebrows quickly relaxed. The strand of hair was still there. She calmly waved her hand and brushed away the strand of hair that was leaning on the edge of the book. Then, she picked up the book. In fact, this book wasn't a secret. Duan Xueqing wasn't worried that Pai Din 1 would steal it. She just left the strand of hair there on a whim. Her purpose was self-evident. She wanted to see if Pai Din 1 was really as polite as he appeared to be in private. Now, it seemed that she was overthinking it. After taking a sip of tea, Duan Xueqing slightly lowered her head, as if she was a little embarrassed by her suspicions. Pai Din 1 didn't know about this at all. He laughed loudly and said, "I just saw this sentence in the book. It's quite interesting." Duan Xueqing looked up at him with a little doubt in her eyes. Making sounds is always useful, because they can be heard and lead to change. Pai Din 1 looked at the book with great interest and said, "There's another sentence, remember, shouting is necessary. Even if no one hears it in this lifetime, the echo will reverberate forever." Duan Xueqing frowned and looked at him. She didn't understand what he meant by that sentence. Soon, Pai Din 1 smiled and analyzed for her. "You see, the great author said that you have to speak more and make more sounds. If you keep things in your heart, who will know what you're thinking?" Duan Xueqing blinked her beautiful eyes. Her eyes were still filled with doubt. In fact, Pai Din 1's analysis had touched her heart. At that moment, Duan Xueqing suddenly remembered her past with Poplar Fruit. He was a big block of wood, and she wasn't much better, a big block of ice. If she didn't say it, Poplar Fruit would never know her feelings until they missed each other again. However, why would Pai Din 1 say this to her? Could it be that he knew about her past? Well, I'll give you an example. Pai Din 1 looked very good when the corners of his eyes curved. You just stood up silently to go to the bathroom. If I didn't ask, I wouldn't know what you were going to do. Who knows, I might be distracted for a moment and turn around, thinking that you left me behind. That would be terrible. What about the bill? Pai Din 1 made a fearful pose, as if he cared about that little money. In fact, it was an exaggeration. Chinese men were a little male chauvinistic. Pai Din 1 was the same. Last time, he was fighting to pay the bill. Originally, Pai Din 1 wanted to beat around the bush to tell a cold joke. However, Duan Xueqing was obviously very amused. At this time, she still looked at Pai Din 1 with a calm face. What a great sense of defeat. Pai Din 1 could only laugh to cover his helplessness and embarrassment with a smile. Wasn't it good to sit quietly and read a book? Why did they start to change the topic again? Could it be that another man was frozen by Duan Xueqing's coldness? However, Pai Din 1 seemed to be very strong-willed. He covered his mouth with his fist and coughed twice. Then, he smiled at Duan Xueqing, who was still looking at him. He raised the book in his hand, indicating for Duan Xueqing to continue. However, the moment he lowered his head, a slender hand reached across the coffee table and reached in front of him. Chapter 557. Duan Xueqing's hands were born to play the piano. Her wrists were slender, her fingers were long, and her hands were white and clean. Her hands were beautiful. They weren't covered in blue veins like a man's hands, nor were they painted with bright nail polish. Other than a string of agate prayer beads, there were no other accessories that could steal the limelight. In fact, Duan Xueqing had been practicing the piano since she was a child, and she played the piano quite well. Her wealthy family gave her an unimaginable environment to grow up in. She had a dedicated piano room and a teacher hired with a lot of money. What was rare was that even her teacher liked her talent. However, she had no intention of developing her career in music, and the piano could only be her hobby. Give it to me. Duan Xueqing's voice seemed to come from a secluded valley, cold and ethereal. At the same time, it also woke up Pai Din 1, who was staring at her hands. Pai Din 1 raised his head. The admiration in his eyes had not completely disappeared. He looked at Duan Xueqing in shock, not knowing what she meant. It seemed like this was the first time that Duan Xueqing had taken the initiative to speak when they were so close to each other. I've waited for so long. Duan Xueqing saw that he didn't move. She turned her hand over and pointed at the book in Pai Din 1's arms. Her cold and elegant face revealed a trace of dissatisfaction. Oh. Pai Din 1's lips drew back into a smile. He shook his head and picked up the book and put it in Duan Xueqing's hands. Duan Xueqing didn't notice that Pai Din 1's book was the Reader's Digest Annual Report. It was one of those pirated books that could be sold at a 10 yuan bookstall on the roadside. Other than the cover, the paper inside was of poor quality. But Pai Din 1 didn't look like a poor person. Duan Xueqing recognized the wristwatch on his wrist. It cost at least 6,000 yuan. Moreover, he said that he was a wedding photographer. How could he not be able to afford a book? Duan Xueqing glanced at Pai Din 1 with a strange look in her eyes. She didn't know if it was because of the Reader's Digest or because Pai Din 1 had bought a pirated copy. Pai Din 1 didn't notice at all. He put his hands on his knees and smiled brightly. Duan Xueqing flipped through the page that Pai Din 1 was reading. She quickly skimmed through the article that he had just said. Pai Din 1 did not purposely make up those few sentences to deceive people. There really was such an article in the book, and it was written by the great writer Bai Sumin. But, what the author wanted to express was not what Pai Din-1 said at all. The original article was about women's equality, but Pai Din-1 brought up the fact that she didn't like to talk. Duan Xueqing glanced at him, but found that this guy was still smiling happily. He didn't seem to reflect on himself at all. Duan Xueqing didn't say anything, nor did she return the book. She took a sip of tea and sat back down. She actually flipped through Pai Din-1's book. It seemed that she didn't want to return the book for a while. Pai Din-1 waited for a while. He scratched his head and said, "You took my book to read. Then what should I read?" It was a book that he had suddenly remembered on the way and bought from a roadside stall on the street. Although the chicken soup for the soul stories were very fake, at least they could pass the time. Seeing that Duan Xueqing was ignoring him, Pai Din-1 smiled and said, "Why don't we change books? Give me one of your books." Duan Xueqing looked up, glanced at him, and said lightly, "You won't understand." She was looking down on him. It hurt his self-esteem too much. No man would be able to tolerate this. Pai Din-1, who had a good temper, was also choked by Duan Xueqing's words. He coughed twice and laughed, "You won't understand. How can you?" Duan Xueqing lowered her eyes and didn't say anything. She used silence to express her meaning, "You will." Pai Din-1 grinned as if the two of them were joking. He counted with his fingers and said to Duan Xueqing, "Don't fool me. I just saw your book. It's about Chinese-English translation theory. I forgot the name. But, I used to study in the United States, okay? How can I not understand English?" Pai Din-1 patted his chest and said confidently, "Give it to me. I can understand it." Duan Xueqing could only pass the theory book to Pai Din-1. "Forget about it. When I was learning English, the most annoying thing was grammar." Pai Din-1 waved his hand and refused, "Give me a novel. A novel is better." Duan Xueqing took back the book in her hand and looked hesitant. "You don't have any more?" Pai Din-1 asked doubtfully, "No way. I saw you take a lot of books last time." She did take a lot last time, but because of the rain today, she only brought 2 books. "But since you are so insistent," Duan Xueqing took out the novel she was reading and passed it to Pai Din-1 with a strange look. Bai Tingyuan took it without hesitation and lowered his head to take a look. He was dumbfounded. "What language is this? It looks like English letters, but I don't know any of the words. Some of the letters even have the little hat of Chinese pinyin. This is French?" Pai Din-1 looked up. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he seemed to see Duan Xueqing smile. But it was also a flash in the pan. He didn't see it clearly before Duan Xueqing calmed down. "Western language." Duan Xueqing looked into his eyes and said lightly, "Isn't that right?" Duan Xueqing brought 2 books today. One was a boring theoretical book, and the other was the Western novel, Seagull. "Okay, I don't understand it." Pai Din-1 admitted frankly and handed the book back. "Read it. I'll pour you some tea." Pai Din-1 waved his hand and smiled. The private room, which had a little bit of movement, returned to silence. It wasn't easy to get Duan Xueqing to say a few words, but it couldn't be easier to get her to bury her head in a book and not say anything. Unknowingly, it was noon again. The rain outside stopped, and the fresh air had the warmth of late summer. Although the bluestone was wet, they were all adults. There was no reason for them to walk on slippery roads. Duan Xueqing and Pai Din-1 parted at the entrance of the park. Although she didn't say anything, her attitude was obviously better than last time. At least she didn't leave with a cold face. She nodded silently before leaving. She had made a lot of progress. Pai Din-1 stayed where he was and watched Duan Xueqing's voice disappear around the corner. Then he turned around and walked in the other direction with a smile. Sitting in an 80% new car, Pai Din 1 reached into his pocket and took out the keys and a Bluetooth headset. Bai Ting Yuan's smile did not fade after he hung up the Bluetooth headset. He tapped the headset lightly with his index finger before turning the key and driving away. Vroom, vroom, in a remote mountain village, Poplar Fruit was standing in front of a group of children. Suddenly, his phone in his pocket rang without any warning. Chapter 558. Poplar Fruit was very popular among the children. Over the past few days, he had almost become the leader of the Hmong village children's troupe. Of course, because Kiki was around, the children did not treat Poplar Fruit as a big brother. However, Poplar Fruit's gentle and generous attitude towards Kiki and all the children was envied by all the children. This incident started with a small matter that happened on the second day after Poplar Fruit went up the mountain. That afternoon, Poplar Fruit had just finished washing his and his daughter's clothes. The water was cold at night, so they usually took a shower early in the mountain. He was drying the clothes in the backyard. Inadvertently, he looked up and saw Xiong Xiaofeng sneakily walking through the wooden building's lobby with a few little ones who still had snot dripping from their noses. Chi-Chi also covered her mouth with both hands and followed behind them like her brothers. Poplar Fruit could not help but laugh. He deliberately shouted, "Yang Luachi, how many of you still remember Kiki's full name __intersection? What are you doing?" It must be said that this Yang Guo was too naughty. She suddenly yelled, scaring the children. In that instant, Xiong Xiaofeng and the others who were tiptoeing forward suddenly froze. Bang! In the blink of an eye, a white object slid down from Xiong Xiaofeng's clothes and fell to the ground along his upturned buttocks, making a dull thud. Poplar Fruit looked at it curiously and found that it was the iPad he had bought in Shicheng. His mind flashed and he finally understood what they were doing. Xiong Xiaofeng must have gone out to brag to his friends about the iPad he had played with. Poplar Fruit had not played with it since he bought it. It was all taken by this little guy. Then, he persuaded Kiki, his little accomplice, to take it out of the room. If the Poplar Fruit hadn't found out, they would have snuck out to play and then returned secretly. Wouldn't everything be fine then? Things were just as Poplar Fruit had guessed. Xiong Xiaofeng wanted to sneak out with the iPad and show off in front of his friends. In the end, he was discovered by Poplar Fruit as soon as he slipped downstairs. Moreover, the iPad that he had hidden behind his back had fallen off. Xiong Xiaofeng's friends were all scared out of their wits, but Xiong Xiaofeng was in an even worse state. His mind was completely blank, and the only thing left was his consciousness, which repeatedly muttered, "I'm dead. He's dead." The Hmong stockade village deep in the mountains was different from the modern metropolises. The education concept of the people there was still very traditional. To put it simply, there was only one word to describe it: fight. A filial son is born from the rod. Spare the rod and spoil the child. In the Hmong village, it was common to see adults chasing after disobedient children with bamboo sticks that were as thick as fingers. Unlike in the city, where children were treasured and cherished. They were afraid of dropping them or melting them in their mouths. Parents couldn't even bear to scold them, let alone whip them. These Hmong stockade village children were usually very naughty, but the deep-rooted fear of their parents' rod education made them immediately understand that they had made a big mistake. When they returned home that night, their buttocks would be bleeding again. However, to Xiong Xiaofeng, being beaten by his father was a small matter. What really struck him like a bolt from the blue was that he had dropped the iPad. Xiong Xiaofeng knew the value of an iPad. At that time, he was also there when Poplar Fruit was negotiating with the store. If it was broken, he wouldn't be able to pay for it even if he sold himself. What should I do? What should I do? Xiong Xiaofeng stood there helplessly, his whole body trembling. Bean-sized tears rolled in his eyes, as if they would roll down anyone who touched him. Among the 6 of them, only Kiki, who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, wasn't nervous. Instead, she was particularly excited that her father had caught her doing something bad. Ah, ah, ah. Chi-Chi covered her eyes as if she was stealing a bell, and screamed loudly. However, listening to her voice, she seemed to think it was quite fun. Poplar Fruit walked over, feeling angry and amused. He ignored the iPad that had fallen on the ground, squatted down, and gently slapped Kiki's little butt. He deliberately said with a straight face, "Yang Luachi, do you know what you are doing?" Poplar Fruit didn't expect that his straight face didn't scare Kiki. Instead, it scared Xiong Xiaofeng, who was on the verge of collapse. When Xiong Xiaofeng saw Poplar Fruit's scary look, he thought that he had come to criticize him. In an instant, he couldn't hold back his tears. With a wah sound, he opened his mouth and cried loudly. The more he cried, the more scared he became. The more scared he was, the more he cried. Xiong Xiaofeng's tears rolled down his eyelids, forming 2 streams on his dark face. At this time, Kiki also stopped screaming. She opened her fingers in surprise and looked at brother Xiong Xiaofeng, who was crying very hard. A lot of question marks appeared on her little head. Why is brother Xiaofeng crying? Xiong Xiaofeng's crying was like a fuse that lit up the fuse. The remaining 4 children of the Hmong village were also provoked and fought to be the first to cry. Later, the real victim, Poplar Fruit, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It took him a lot of effort to coax the 5 children. Poplar Fruit naturally didn't care about a small iPad. Not to mention that it wasn't broken, even if it was, he wouldn't let Xiong Xiaofeng pay for it. However, taking advantage of this opportunity, Poplar Fruit explained a lot of reasons to the children, including Kiki, who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. It was wrong to steal other people's things. If they wanted to play with it, they should directly tell Uncle Poplar Fruit. It wasn't a big deal. In Poplar Fruit's view, it was just an interesting small wave in Kiki's growth. However, through this incident and the children's word of mouth, the image of Uncle Poplar Fruit as a good person was deeply ingrained in the children's hearts. Poplar Fruit really liked to play with the children. Now that he was on vacation, he didn't need to stay in front of the computer to do translation, nor did he need to ponder over translation theories and linguistic knowledge. It was just right for him to take Kiki to play with the children. Once, Poplar Fruit was on a whim. At Xiong Jiwu's house, Poplar Fruit told stories to a few children of the Hmong village who came to play. Those stories weren't very new. They were all stories that Poplar Fruit had read in a children's book when he was a child. However, for the children of the Hmong village who were almost isolated from the outside world, these stories were the most interesting they had ever heard in their lives. After that day, a few more children came to listen to the stories. Later, not only the children of the entire Xiong village, but even the children of the nearby Hmong village who came to visit their relatives came. There were too many people. Xiong Kahu quickly asked someone to clean up the classroom of the elementary school that had been abandoned for a while. He then asked Poplar Fruit to go there and tell the children stories. Poplar Fruit later joked that it was Daddy Yang's big lecture room. If it were someone else, they would probably be a little overwhelmed. However, Poplar Fruit became more and more energetic as he spoke. He was worried that the stories he told were too cliché, so he specially found a lot of stories on the internet and memorized them. He really did a lot of preparation work as if he was teaching a class to the students. Not only that, but in order to broaden the children's horizons, Poplar Fruit would also talk about some of the local customs and strange stories around the world. These were all intoxicating to the children. Speaking of which, Poplar Fruit was really born to be a teacher. Chapter 559. Xiong Mingming, tell me. How do you say Halloween in the United States? Poplar Fruit was so excited that he asked the children to stand up and answer the questions. Poplar Fruit, who had received a university education, understood that the old style of force-feeding was definitely not as effective as the new style of education where there was a lot of interaction between the teacher and the students. Therefore, he often threw out some small questions to guide the children to recall the small points of knowledge that he mixed in when telling stories. Xiong Mingming was 1 year older than Xiong Xiaofeng, but his English was as bad as the other children. He stood up and racked his brain but could not think of anything. The short stories of Halloween, pumpkin lanterns, costume parties, door-to-door candy begging, and so on, all fascinated the children. After 2 or 3 days, they would probably be able to recite them with great familiarity. However, they couldn't remember the English Halloween stories no matter how hard they tried. Papa, Papa. Kiki, who was sitting in the front, only half of her head could be seen from the table. She shook her little butt uneasily, raised her hand high, and shouted confidently, "I know." Poplar Fruit, of course, knew that she knew. Kiki inherited her father's memory. However, the little girl's desire to show off was too strong. She rushed to answer a few questions at the front, so Poplar Fruit decided to give the opportunity to the other children. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Kiki, put your hand down. We'll let Brother Mingming answer." Xiong Mingming lowered his head in shame and said softly, "Teacher, I don't know." "It's okay," Poplar Fruit smiled and comforted him, "I'll give you a hint." At this time, the phone in his trouser pocket vibrated. Previously, he only turned off the sound and did not completely turn off the phone. Poplar Fruit reflexively pulled out the phone. He glanced at it and pressed the call. Then, he put the phone on the podium and ignored it. "Teacher told you about it just now." Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "The English of Halloween. The first few sounds like we usually say hello in English." "How do we say hello in English?" Poplar Fruit had said this before. Because it was relatively simple, the children in the Hmong village said loudly, "Hello." "Right." Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "Right, then, how do you say Halloween in English?" "Mingming, think about it again." "Hello. Hello." Xiong Mingming scratched his head and repeated the words over and over again in deep thought. Yang Guo saw that Chi-Chi was already somewhat unable to restrain herself from twisting and turning on the chair. He smiled and stretched out his hand to press the air, indicating that she should not be anxious. "I remember now." Xiong Mingming's eyes lit up. Hao Wei asked, "It's Hao Wei who asked." Although his pronunciation was not accurate, he did not disappoint Poplar Fruit and remembered the word. Poplar Fruit clapped his hands and gave him a thumbs up with a smile. Then, he praised, "Right, it's Halloween." Then, he turned around and wrote the word on the old blackboard behind him. Then, he taught the children to read it over and over again. After all, their English was poor. Except for Kiki, the other children made mistakes. However, Poplar Fruit was very patient. He walked to them one by one to correct their pronunciation. It was not until lunch that the children were reluctantly taken home by their parents. Several children from other Hmong village who came from afar were also taken home by their parents. Everyone in the village was quite poor. Although Poplar Fruit urged them to stay, they were too embarrassed to stay for lunch. They were worried that they would burden others. At this time, Poplar Fruit had time to pick up his phone and check the missed call. He called back. After a while, the call was connected. "Lao Gua." A voice full of resentment came from the receiver. Poplar Fruit took the phone away from his ear. Otherwise, his eardrums would have been broken. Hearing this name, everyone should know who the caller was. That's right, it was Song Jiwen. Kiki, who was being held by her father, heard the voice. She blinked her big watery eyes and asked curiously, "Uncle Mosquito? What did you do?" Poplar Fruit nodded to Kiki, then asked with a smile, "Why do you sound like a resentful woman?" "You're still talking about it." Song Jiwon wailed and said, "Didn't you finish the meeting long ago? Why aren't you back yet? How many days have you been wandering outside?" Poplar Fruit looked at the phone screen. It was indeed Song Jiwon. That was strange. This guy was heartless. When had he been so concerned about him? Poplar Fruit took his daughter to play outside. Fong Beibei often talked to him on the phone. His mother and other family members also asked him to tell them that he was safe. Song Jiwon's mother and Poplar Fruit's godmother, Lu Suchin, would also ask about his well-being. This was normal. But when did Song Jiwon become so concerned about him? Did the sun rise from the west? "You don't have a fever, do you?" Poplar Fruit asked curiously. "Hey, what are you talking about? Can't I care about you?" Song Jiwon said confidently. With his daughter by his side, Poplar Fruit couldn't complain to Song Jiwon. He could only hold back his laughter and said, "Come on, you care about me? If you have something to say, just say it. Don't be so weird. You're giving me goosebumps." Song Jiwon grumbled a few times in dissatisfaction. Then, he told him the reason for his anger. "That little pepper is here." It turned out that when Song Jiwon came back from work yesterday, he was humming a tune as he walked out of the elevator. He bumped into Chen Anlin, who was anxiously pacing back and forth in the corridor. To be exact, he almost bumped into Chen Anlin's back. In the end, Chen Anlin's conditioned reflex caused him to be thrown out by Chen Anlin, who thought he was a pervert. He fell until his bones were about to fall apart. It was a big deal to fall on all fours and lose face. "Ah. Isn't she going back to school?" Poplar Fruit asked curiously. "Why is she here in Yangcheng?" After listening to Song Jiwon's explanation, Poplar Fruit found out that Chen Anlin somehow managed to convince the elders in her family. After getting permission, she came to Yangcheng to find a place to open a Taiji dojo. Chen Anlin was already in her 4th year of university. She didn't need to go to class. At most, she would have to go back to hand in her thesis and attend the graduation ceremony. Since the 4th year of university was a year of internship and job hunting, she could be considered to have met the school's requirements by starting her own business in Yangcheng. Of course, other than opening a dojo to test out her new management concept, Chen Anlin also had another purpose in coming to Yangcheng. That was to find Poplar Fruit to spar. So, the moment she got off the plane, she went to the address Poplar Fruit gave her. "Brother, I'm already calling you brother," Song Jiwon said with snot and tears. "You don't know how bad little Pepper's temper is. Hurry up and come back to take her away." Chapter 560. Poplar Fruit could imagine how interesting it would be for Song Jiwon and Chen Anlin, who were like fire and water, to meet each other. Song Jiwon's blabbermouth and Chen Anlin's extraordinary martial arts were enough to make Song Jiwon suffer. Yesterday, Song Jiwon kindly asked her to stay for the night. In the end, the two of them fought 5 times in just a few hours. Rather than calling it a fight, it would be better to say that Song Jiwon was one-sided. It was the same in the morning. Chen Anlin woke up early like Poplar Fruit. She wanted to find a place to exercise, so she knocked on Song Jiwon's door. "Stop." Poplar Fruit frowned and asked doubtfully, "What do you mean by knocking on your door? Didn't you say that you let her stay overnight?" "Yes, I let her stay," Song Jiwon said confidently. "I let her stay at your place." Poplar Fruit's veins twitched. He said in annoyance and amusement, "It's not like you don't have room. Why did you let her stay in my room? Hey, why don't you think about it? She's a big girl. Is it appropriate for her to live in the same room with a man like me?" Song Jiwon said hypocritically. Actually, he just didn't want to sleep on the sofa. "My room hasn't been cleaned," Poplar Fruit said doubtfully. "You've been out for more than a month. It must be smelly, right?" Can she accept it? Of course not. Song Jiwen said proudly. It turned out that after Song Jiwen came back and saw that Poplar Fruit wasn't around, he often came to Poplar Fruit's study to play games. Sometimes, he played too late, so he simply slept in Poplar Fruit's bedroom. In his words, he was making the best use of everything. I can't let you pay rent for nothing, Song Jiwen said. Poplar Fruit was really speechless about this shameless hardcore fan. Speaking of which, Chen Anlin knocked on Song Jiwen's door in the morning. He knocked several times, but no one answered. Song Jiwen was a typical night owl. He slept soundly before 11 o'clock in the morning. How could Song Jiwen hear Chen Anlin knocking on the door? Later on, Chen Anlin increased his strength and knocked on the door so hard that the ground shook. However, Song Jiwen rolled up his blanket and went back to sleep. When Chen Anlin saw that Song Jiwen was ignoring her, Little Chili Pepper's temper flared up. She took 2 steps back and arched backwards. Suddenly, she sped up and jumped up. Her short but well-proportioned and beautiful right leg kicked out. Gotcha! Bam! The thick wooden door was kicked open by her kick. Chen Anlin landed firmly on the ground. In a cloud of dust, she strode into Song Jiwen's bedroom. She pulled up Song Jiwen, who was sleeping soundly under the blanket, and gave him a good beating. Woo-woo! Song Jiwen pretended to cry. He was pretending. In fact, Chen Anlin did not hurt him at all. At first, Chen Anlin did not hit him well as he was blocked by the blanket. Later on, in a fit of anger, Chen Anlin yanked Song Jiwen's blanket over and threw it away. In the end, Song Jiwen was used to sleeping without clothes. When the blanket that blocked her line of sight flew to the other side, Song Jiwen appeared in front of her, naked except for a pair of red underwear. At this time, Song Jiwen was still sitting on the bed in a daze. He was still a little dazed after being forcefully woken up. Ah! Chen Anlin was embarrassed and angry. She screamed, covered her eyes, and rushed out. Ah! Song Jiwen, who had just come back to his senses, screamed weakly. He pulled up the bed sheet and covered himself with it. His face was full of grief and anger, but no one looked at him. All right, you were just seen. And the person who saw it was a beauty. Poplar Fruit laughed. You didn't lose out. I don't care. Song Jiwen said sadly. Lao Gua, quickly come back and take her away. I can't live like this anymore. Yes, fighting all day. He couldn't even sleep in on weekends. Song Jiwen felt that his world was collapsing day by day. First of all, don't call me Gua. Just hearing it gives me goosebumps. Poplar Fruit said helplessly. The name Gua used to be exclusive to Lu Yunran. Ever since they broke up, Poplar Fruit had never heard it again. He didn't want to hear it from anyone else, especially a man. Secondly, I really have something to do now. I can't go back yet. Poplar Fruit said, I have to finish things here. Then what about her? Song Jiwen asked angrily. Just take care of her for a while. Poplar Fruit said speechlessly, let's not talk about how she's our friend first. She's a girl in her early 20s who came all the way to Yangcheng. She's unfamiliar with the place and you're the only person she knows. If you don't take care of her, who will? But she still wants me to take care of her. I'll be thankful if she doesn't bully me. Song Jiwen still wanted to argue. What's there to but about? Poplar Fruit said, don't always fight. You're 3 or 4 years older than her. Why don't you take a step back? Men need to be more open-minded, okay? I really don't know how you got girls in the past. Actually, Song Jiwen wasn't such a calculative person. It was just that every time he saw Chen Anlin, he couldn't help but want to make her angry. From another perspective, seeing Qin Anlin, Song Jiwen's desire to be abused increased. While I'm not back, Anlan can stay at my house. You can help take care of her. If she has any problems, you can help her. Poplar Fruit persuaded, Anlan is actually a good girl. If you talk to her nicely, she won't hit you. For this, Poplar Fruit asked for Qin Anlin's phone number. After lunch, he called her and mediated for them. However, whether it was useful or not, Poplar Fruit didn't know. At night, when Poplar Fruit and Fang Beibei were chatting, Poplar Fruit even told Fang Beibei about this matter as a joke. Is she staying at your place? Fang Beibei's attention wasn't on Song Jiwen and Qin Anlin's fight. She asked very sensitively. Poplar Fruit didn't notice. He smiled and said, yeah, Song Jiwen is too much of a scammer. But that's good too. Song Jiwen usually dresses casually at home. It's better not to let them hang out together. It's bad for the girl's reputation. Then what will you do when you come back? Fang Beibei seemed to be concerned. Where will you sleep? If she hasn't found a place to stay, then I'll sleep in the living room. Poplar Fruit said matter-of-factly. It's quite pitiful for a girl like her to come to Yangcheng. Qin Anlin. I think she's pretty just by hearing her name. Fang Beibei said as she pondered. She's really pretty. Poplar Fruit smiled. And she's very petite. She looks just like a junior high school student. But, she's older than you. Don't call her sister when you see her, haha. Fang Beibei suddenly went silent. All that was left was her chaotic breathing. Poplar Fruit was still smiling foolishly. He didn't know that a sour atmosphere was surging. Chapter 561. Is the line disconnected? Poplar Fruit asked in confusion when he couldn't hear Fang Beibei's reply. The internet signal on the mountain wasn't very good, but the phone signal was still pretty good. Usually, when he called, the line wouldn't suddenly be disconnected. No. Fang Beibei said angrily. Poplar Fruit laughed happily, that's good. Let me tell you, she also practices Tai Chi in the past. When I was in Yangcheng, I didn't see anyone who was good at Tai Chi. After seeing her, I found out that they were all gathered in Huabei. Fang Beibei snorted in dissatisfaction. She's really good at it. Yang Guo hurriedly explained, although the direction was a bit off, don't be fooled by the fact that she's a girl and has a small stature. Ordinary men can't even get close to her. If Song Jiwen meets her, he will only be beaten up. As he said that, Poplar Fruit even laughed to himself. Why do you keep talking about her? Fang Beibei finally couldn't hold it in and said angrily, Uncle, did you see that she has a child's face, and a good figure, so you're thinking of something bad again? Poplar Fruit, who was slow to react, finally understood that Fang Beibei was jealous. In fact, Fang Beibei's temper was already very good. Usually in the dormitory, she didn't even get angry with her roommates. However, no matter how good her temper was, she couldn't take it when she heard Poplar Fruit chattering non-stop about other girls being beautiful. No. Poplar Fruit quickly swore, I'm just friends with her. Why would I have any ideas about her? It's not like I like every girl I meet. Besides, I only have you in my heart. Poplar Fruit silently added in his heart and Kiki. His skin was now very thick, and he could say such words without blushing or skipping a beat. When Fang Beibei heard what Poplar Fruit said, her anger had mostly dissipated. She snorted twice and said, don't talk about her anymore. Okay, let's change the topic, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. School is about to start. Do you want to welcome the new students? Welcoming the freshmen was the most lively ceremony every year when freshmen entered the university. Freshmen like Fang Beibei were the main force in welcoming the freshmen. Poplar Fruit had participated in this event when he was in university. It was at that time that he met Duan Xueqing. However, after that one time, Poplar Fruit was as fearful as a ferocious tiger and did not participate a second time. It was too tiring to stand under the scorching sun to guide the freshmen and help carry their luggage. Fang Beibei was part of the student union of their university. Moreover, she remained as a department head at the end of the semester. Their student union should need her to participate in the welcoming ceremony. Moreover, even if Fang Beibei was not part of the student union, with her helpful personality, she would probably take the initiative to participate, right? That was why Poplar Fruit asked this question. I was going to go. Fang Beibei said helplessly, but I was still participating in the training. When school started, I couldn't leave, so I couldn't help much. That's a pity. Poplar Fruit said with a smile, I still want to ask you to welcome me when I enter the university. Poplar Fruit was also joking with Fang Beibei. How could he bear to let Fang Beibei help him carry his luggage, even if it was not a lot? If Fang Beibei wanted to volunteer to welcome the freshmen, Poplar Fruit would probably go and help. Do you also want me to welcome you? Fang Beibei's voice was clear and pleasant, making Poplar Fruit's little tricks unable to escape. You are the big brother, okay? Ha! Poplar Fruit laughed. Regardless of the past, I am now a freshman. Speaking of which, it was quite interesting. After graduation, he mingled in society for 2 years. In the end, he returned to his familiar alma mater and started anew as a new student. However, compared to 6 years ago, his identity and encounters were completely different. Poplar Fruit had a problem. After he went back to study, the university would definitely assign him a postgraduate dormitory. Then, where would he live? Poplar Fruit could now be said to have 2 properties, although they were only rented. Plus the dormitory, there were 3 places. How could he choose where to live? What a happy problem. When I have classes, I will live in the teacher's dormitory. I don't think I can live in the dormitory. I still have to take care of Kiki. It's not good to bring the child to the dormitory and affect the roommates. Then, on the weekends, I can go back to the big house to play for 2 days. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Live in the teacher's dormitory. Fang Beibei suddenly said. Yes, that's what I meant. Poplar Fruit said. I mean, you can live in the teacher's dormitory when you come back. Fang Beibei and he were talking about different things. It's so good in the teacher's dormitory. You don't have to sleep on the sofa. In the end, Fang Beibei was still brooding over Poplar Fruit's suggestion of living in the same room as Chen Anlin. Now, she thought of such a good idea. Fang Beibei's unhappy expression just now was still lingering in Poplar Fruit's mind. Of course, he wouldn't continue to be confused by Fang Beibei's words. Don't worry, she should be living outside when she finds a place. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. She came to Yangcheng to open a dojo. There will be a place for her to live. However, the effect of his words wasn't obvious. Poplar Fruit pondered in his heart. He scratched his head and said, Of course, I like living in the teacher's dormitory the most because I can see you often. Who wants to see you? Fang Beibei said sweetly and pretended to be angry. Poplar Fruit could hear Fang Beibei's happiness. He was a little carried away and said casually, Beibei, I kind of miss last semester. Do you know, the happiest thing in my life was coming back from outside and opening the door to see you cooking under the faint orange light in the kitchen? Why don't you come and live with me next semester? Hey! Uncle, what are you up to now? Fang Beibei was startled by Poplar Fruit. Her voice suddenly went up an octave as if she had hit rock bottom. Fang Beibei was still a relatively simple girl. This simple didn't mean that she didn't know anything, but that her thoughts were still a little traditional. Just like the first time Poplar Fruit saw Fang Beibei, this girl was like a little white flower that could only be seen from afar and not profaned. Fang Beibei said unhappily, "Don't forget. You still have half a month of observation." After Fang Beibei said that, she added a small warning, "With your performance today, you'll lose points." Poplar Fruit was dumbfounded. He wanted to slap himself. How did he get carried away? Proposing to live together was too big a step. Well, he almost pulled his balls. Fang Beibei wasn't really angry. It was just that Poplar Fruit had crossed the line and had to be given a yellow card warning. Chapter 562. At night, the Hmong village, which had very little nightlife, was quiet. Only the chirping of cicadas could be heard in the entire village. Kiki went to bed early on the mountain as well. Following her brothers and sisters around during the day had consumed a lot of her energy. However, Kiki's appetite had obviously increased due to the frequent running and playing, which made Poplar Fruit very happy. Poplar Fruit couldn't sleep so early. He lay on the rattan chair on the balcony and stared blankly at the computer. Of course, Yang Guo was actually thinking about something. She was multitasking. On one hand, she was thinking about what to teach the children in class tomorrow. On the other hand, she was studying how to perfect her plan to let the children be able to read books. Goldie was curled up next to Poplar Fruit, squinting its eyes and enjoying its owner's caress. Buzz. Buzz. The phone suddenly vibrated without warning. Goldie immediately felt it and sat up on its stomach with a quiver. Staying up late again. Poplar Fruit took out his phone and saw that it was Zheng Yujie calling. He mumbled and picked up the phone. Poplar Fruit patted Goldie's head and signaled it not to be nervous. He then smiled and said to Zheng Yujie, "Why are you so late again? What's wrong with being late? It's not like I don't know that you're definitely not lying in bed at this time." Zheng Yujie said rudely. "Hey, I'm just concerned about you, okay?" Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "I sleep late because I have a good physique. You're a girl, sleeping so late every day. Be careful that your eye bags will fall out before you're 30 years old." "Oh. What should I do? I feel that my eye bags are really big recently." Zheng Yujie immediately changed her sweet voice and whispered in Poplar Fruit's ear. Poplar Fruit shivered as if he had poured a glass of ice water in winter. He said helplessly, "What else can I do? Don't work so hard. Rest early." "Alright, you called me so late at night. Is there any good news? I knew you were heartless." Zheng Yujie pursed her lips and patted the pillow next to her. "I haven't called you for so long, and now you're talking about you. Your concern is just lip service, isn't it?" Poplar Fruit laughed and said, "You even care about this? It couldn't be, right? Yujie, you're much older than me. Just because I'm older than you, does that mean I can be ignored?" Zheng Yujie was in high spirits today. She actually imitated my daughter and started to make a scene. She laughed and shouted, "I'm a girl. As a man, shouldn't you take the initiative to ask about her well-being? Why are you so anxious about those computers? Do you want to do a good deed to please your kind-hearted friend of my daughter?" Poplar Fruit was very rational and did not respond to this topic. He just smiled and explained, "I am concerned. Didn't I tell you not to stay up late and rest early? Besides, it's useless even if I say it. Aren't you doing it according to your own ideas?" The two of them chatted noisily for a while before returning to the main topic. "You really found it?" Poplar Fruit asked in surprise. "Found it. But do you know how hard it is to find it?" Zheng Yujie proudly took credit. "It has to be cheap and easy to use. There is no computer on the market that meets your requirements." "Then how did you find it?" Poplar Fruit asked curiously. I asked my friend to go door to door in Zhongguancun and found someone in a basement. Zheng Yujie laughed. That person was called Kai Si-min, a hardware expert. It was worth mentioning his education. Zheng Yujie said that Kai Si-min was a person who came to work in Zhongguancun's computer city before graduating from junior high school. After 5 years in Zhongguancun, Kai Si-min now opened a small computer assembly shop. In order to make his business the best, Kai Si-min not only knew all the hardware produced by major manufacturers like the back of his hand, but he also taught himself to program and even understood the Linux system. His business level is average, he doesn't make much money a year, but his computer assembly skills are the best in Zhongguancun's computer city. Zheng Yujie introduced. So our computer was assembled by him? Poplar Fruit asked excitedly. That's right. Zheng Yujie laughed, but it's a little different from ordinary computers. A little different, actually it should be said that it changed from the inside to the outside. Kai Si-min figured out a new computer with very low specs. The CPU, graphics card, memory, etc. were all the cheapest, and the system was also modified by him based on Linux. One had to know that the most common Windows system required a lot of configuration. For a computer like Kai Si-min's, the hardware configuration was completely unable to support the simplest XP system. Therefore, Kai Si-min could only use Linux to upgrade Android to 4, which was released last year. System 0 was modified to match the operating system of the computer screen. It's called the Android Comet system, Zheng Yujie said. Not to mention how bad the name was, the Comet system couldn't be compatible with too many software. For example, common software like QQ would become very weird after being amplified by the Android Comet system. In order to complete this work, Kai Si-min spent a lot of effort, he even carefully transplanted the open-source Firefox browser into the system. However, after it was launched, just like its name, it was like a comet across the sky. In the blink of an eye, not even its shadow could be seen. It wasn't hard to understand. His computer was sold for 1,500 yuan, but who couldn't afford to buy a computer in Zhongguancun for 2,000 to 3,000 yuan for a low-specs Windows computer? Since there was no difference in price, why would others want to buy his computer? Then why did we choose it? Poplar Fruit asked curiously. The specs are good. And it's cheap. Zheng Yujie laughed, it's mainly because it's cheap. I asked someone and he's willing to sell it for 1,000 yuan. Didn't you say that the specs are very low? Poplar Fruit asked curiously, we can't buy inferior products for children just because it's cheap. Low specs, then it depends on what it's compared to. Zheng Yujie laughed, it has 2 GB of RAM and 32 GB of hard disk. Compared to the computers we use, it's really too small. However, compared to a mobile phone system, don't you think that the specs are already very high? I tried it with a prototype. Although I can't afford to play large games, I can still watch videos and use small applications like Office software. Don't look down on the hard disk. Zheng Yujie turned into a technical enthusiast. She explained to Poplar Fruit, Kai Si-min said that we can spend some money to buy a small server, then he can build a workstation for us. It can supply at least 50 computers like his. Chapter 563. Poplar Fruit listened vaguely. His understanding of technical terms such as server and workstation stopped at the literal meaning. However, Zheng Yujie was obviously using other people's words to pretend that she did not know. When Poplar Fruit asked, she also did not understand. Anyway, you just need to understand that other than the software adaptation problem, the other aspects of this machine are still very good. Zheng Yujie said solemnly, I took it back and played with it. You didn't get cheated, did you? Poplar Fruit was still a little skeptical. If it's good, why is it so cheap? Why can't it be sold? Actually, this was a technical misunderstanding. Cheap not good, this logic was not completely correct. Kai Simin's Comet System computer was cheap because of its hardware configuration. A good motherboard could easily cost 700 to 800 yuan, and a memory card could easily cost a few hundred yuan, not to mention the CPU and other hardware. If one wanted to be cheap, then one had to work on the hardware. The motherboard did not need to be too good. Some domestic motherboards were produced a few years ago. After the test of time, the price was much cheaper. A memory card of 2 GB was not expensive. One could get a good one for 100 or 200 yuan. As for the graphics card and CPU, those were bought as cheap as possible. Kai Huiman's Comet system did not rely too much on high-configuration hardware. The only drawback of this computer now was that it could not run large-scale games. For video, as long as it was not the kind of 1080p movie that easily cost a few gigabytes, it could also handle it. If one put aside the game and the experience of some software, Kai Simin's computer was still very smooth and easy to use. Thus, it seemed that such a computer did not cater to Poplar Fruit's needs, right? Some people said that one did not need the best when buying things, only the most expensive. That was the behavior of a tycoon. For Poplar Fruit, suitable and cheap were what he needed the most. He wanted so many children to have the opportunity to obtain education through long-distance education. Thus, even if he had money, he could not simply spend the hardware purchase. For example, if the total cost of helping a child was 10,000 yuan, then if an extra 1,000 yuan was spent on a computer, then 10 computers would cost an extra 10,000 yuan. In other words, if Poplar Fruit spent money recklessly and bought 10 computers, then a child would lose the opportunity to receive help. I suddenly forgot. Zheng Yujie laughed. This computer, I feel like it's an upgraded version of the Little Tyrant learning machine. Saying that it was like the Little Tyrant learning machine was not because of its configuration, but because it was the same as the Little Tyrant learning machine. It did not have a display screen. It's like a big keyboard that's a little thick. Of course, it's also equipped with a mouse. Zheng Yujie found it funny when she thought about it. When you use it, you'll need an external display. Don't worry about the display. Zheng Yujie said, my aunt's company has a cooperation with Lenovo. They can sell us a batch of display screens that need to be cleared after the replacement at the price of 200 yuan each. Seems like it's quite good. Poplar Fruit scratched his head. Listening to Zheng Yujie's exaggerated descriptions, Poplar Fruit was very doubtful if it was really that good. He did not know how to make a decision now. Quick, give me the address. I'll get someone to send 2 over tomorrow for you to try. Zheng Yujie was very dissatisfied with Poplar Fruit's hesitation. She said hurriedly, try it out. If it doesn't work, I'll return it. Poplar Fruit read the address to Zheng Yujie, then added, remember to give my phone number to the delivery man. The mountain roads here are difficult to travel. When he arrives, I can pick him up. Got it. Zheng Yujie replied excitedly, then hung up the phone. Poplar Fruit suspected that she hung up the phone in such a hurry. Based on his understanding of Zheng Yujie's character, Poplar Fruit felt that this suspicion was very likely to become a reality. In fact, Zheng Yujie had done a lot of work behind the scenes. Although Poplar Fruit did not see it, he could still feel it. She had a lot of work and life to do, and she was also helping Poplar Fruit, the shopkeeper, to take care of Wanhetiani, which they had invested in. Poplar Fruit just said hello, and she even asked a friend to help her inquire about the computer. It was definitely not easy to find Kai Simin in a basement in Zhongguancun. Poplar Fruit actually silently remembered these feelings in his heart. Poplar Fruit owed a lot of love debts, but there was no way he could give Zheng Yujie the love she craved the most. He could only find an opportunity to repay them one by one in the future. If it was really as Zheng Yujie said, then Poplar Fruit's plan might be very likely to be realized. Poplar Fruit did some calculations. There were about 100 children of the right age in Xiong village, and there were at least 300 children in the other 2 Hmong villages nearby. According to the basic equipment, a computer and a display screen would cost about 1,200 yuan per person. There might also be the purchase of other consumables such as plugs and network cables, so it would be 1,300 yuan. 300 people would be 390,000 yuan. In addition, every 50 people would be equipped with a small server that cost more than 4,000 yuan. There would be about 6 servers, which would be around 30,000 yuan. Other than that, there would be projectors, scanners, cameras, and other necessary equipment for long-distance education. It would only cost 500,000 yuan to give these children the opportunity to receive long-distance education. Although the equipment configuration was only the first small step in the implementation of Poplar Fruit's plan, from a budget point of view, the investment was the biggest part of Poplar Fruit's entire plan. Poplar Fruit had always insisted on doing charity, which was to spend the least amount of money to do the best thing. That was because the less money they spent on each unit, the more people they could help. After receiving the good news, Poplar Fruit became more and more energetic. He was so excited that he couldn't even fall asleep when he climbed back into bed. After a while, Poplar Fruit climbed out of bed and ran to the balcony to make a phone call. "Fat Dragon, what have you been doing recently? Are you busy?" Poplar Fruit knew that this guy who was more of a night owl than him was still awake in the middle of the night. "I'm not very busy, but I didn't waste any of your money. Our friend in South Yu Kingdom is now working on a very interesting game," Fat Dragon said. "Very interesting. Can I play?" Poplar Fruit curiously asked. "It hasn't been done yet. It's just an idea. That guy is writing the program day and night." Fat Dragon laughed. "Che." Poplar Fruit uninterestedly waved his hand and said, "Oh right, I'm not here to check on you. I have a private matter that I need your help with." "Okay. Whose computer do you want to hack?" Fat Dragon excitedly asked. "What are you thinking?" Poplar Fruit snappily laughed. "I want you to come over to my place and help me look at something." "Where are you?" "Fuck. Why did you go to that remote corner of Guishan province?" Fat Dragon glanced at the surveillance software on his phone and cried out. Chapter 564. Under the night sky, some people were happy, while others were sad. Poplar Fruit was full of joy after putting down the phone. However, he didn't know that Zheng Yujie, who was far away in Beijing, slowly slid down to sit at the foot of the bed after hanging up the phone. She closed her eyes tiredly along her white neck. Zheng Yujie wasn't as lively and confident as she appeared on the phone. These days, the pressure from her family made it hard for her to breathe. After a few days of crazy bombardment, even Zheng Yujie felt a little tired. However, Zheng Yujie didn't want to be like most girls, who would confide in the person they trusted the most when they encountered a problem. She gritted her teeth and bore everything she had suffered in the capital alone, unwilling to let Yang Guo know. There were many reasons for this. She was worried that Poplar Fruit wouldn't be able to accept the negative actions of her family. She was also afraid that Poplar Fruit would be frightened by her family. However, most importantly, she still hoped that Poplar Fruit wouldn't come into contact with her or the other side of her family. Now, Poplar Fruit was the last untainted female land in her heart. However, she really didn't have it easy recently. It all started a few days ago when she went home to have dinner with her grandfather. This time, it could be considered half a family gathering because Zheng Mingsheng, who hadn't been home for more than 2 months, finally came back. Unlike the last time when he suddenly came back, second uncle and youngest uncle rushed over after receiving the notice. Zheng Mingsheng's position in the Zheng family was second only to the current head of the family, Zheng Jianhua. However, with his official position, he was actually higher than Zheng Jianhua before he retired. However, Zheng Mingsheng was a filial son. To him, his father was his father. As long as his father was still alive, he still had the final say in the family. Zheng Yujie only came back when it was almost time for dinner. However, as soon as she came back, she found that the atmosphere in the house was a little heavy. "Mom, what happened?" Zheng Yujie held Deng Baoyan's hand a little worriedly and asked secretly. "It's nothing. Don't worry." Deng Baoyan forced a smile and said. Looking at his expression, how could he be fine? Zheng Yujie frowned. She glanced around and found that the juniors were all confused. Only Zheng Taiming was sitting on the sofa with a bitter face. "You know it, don't you?" Zheng Yujie grabbed Zheng Taiming's ear and dragged him to the small balcony. "When Dad and Grandpa were talking in the study, I eavesdropped on them. You also know that if the door of our study isn't locked, it can't be soundproof." Zheng Taiming said honestly. "Cut the crap." Zheng Yujie raised her eyebrows. She had no interest in listening to Zheng Taiming's eavesdropping. "What happened?" Hey. Zheng Taiming was in so much pain that he broke free from Zheng Yujie's clutches. He rubbed his red ears for a long time before he said, "I can't hear you clearly." Seeing his sister's beautiful red phoenix eyes become fierce again, Zheng Taiming quickly got to the point. "It seems that Dad can't come back to Beijing to be the municipal party secretary." "Why?" Zheng Yujie's heart suddenly jumped as she asked sternly. "I don't know." Zheng Taiming scratched his head and muttered. "Then he's still staying in Hubei province?" Zheng Yujie continued to ask. "No." Zheng Taiming shook his head. "If he's not coming back to Beijing and not staying in Hubei province, then where is he going?" Zheng Yujie asked anxiously. "I don't know. I didn't hear this before Mom caught me." Zheng Taiming lowered his head and said. You really?" Zheng Yujie didn't know what to say to him. She angrily pushed Zheng Taiming, pushed open the door, and walked inside. Without looking back, she said, "Why can't you do anything right?" News had spread a few months ago that her father was going to be promoted to be the municipal party secretary in Beijing. Everyone in the family felt that it was a done deal. However, why did he suddenly change his mind at the last moment before the central government issued the order? With this in mind, Zheng Yujie was a little absent-minded while eating. Although she was eating with her chopsticks, her eyes were looking left and right at her father and several uncles. The atmosphere was very oppressive. Even the two usually naughty cousins and the youngest cousin were so scared that they only dared to bury their heads in the rice. They didn't even dare to make a sound. The only one who was calm was Zheng Jianhua, who had experienced countless ups and downs in his life. He ate and drank well, as if he was the only indifferent cliff in the storm. Zheng Mingxing didn't eat much. Instead, he had been drinking tea. He hesitated for a while before finally putting down the cup heavily. Bang! This sound gave everyone a fright. Okay. Zheng Mingxing looked at his two younger brothers indifferently, then looked at Deng Baoyan sitting to his right. He said slowly in a voice that was neither soft nor soft, "Isn't it just a change in the transfer order? It's not like the sky is falling down. What are you worried about? I originally didn't want you children to know so early." Zheng Mingxing looked around at the third generation of the family. All of them had their heads lowered. He felt a little sad in his heart. Zheng Mingxing's ability to be an official was obvious to all. It could be said that among the many large families in Beijing, there might not be many as outstanding as him. When he was walking on the path of an official, Zheng Jianhua's help could be said to be very little. Even for several decades, he didn't receive much help from the family. However, he still fought his way from the secretary of a county magistrate in a remote county to the current position of the leader of Hubei province. If his journey was written, it would definitely be a very inspirational official novel. However, Zheng Mingxing himself was doing very well as an official, but the Zheng family had always been in a state of not being very popular. In the second generation, other than him carrying the banner, the other second and third brothers, as well as the fourth sister who didn't come today, all wasted their youth on a piece of newspaper and a pot of tea. As for the third generation, Zheng Mingsheng was even more disappointed. Zheng Yujie was still working hard and made some achievements in the publishing house, but she didn't walk on the path of an official. Of course, she was a girl and couldn't ask for too much. Zheng Mingsheng, whom he had high hopes for, was quite smart, but it was only in small matters. He was also lazy and gluttonous. At least for now, he had always disappointed Zheng Mingsheng. Needless to say, the other third-generation juniors were too cowardly and couldn't be put in an important position. Do I really have to find a large family for marriage? This thought flashed through Zheng Mingsheng's mind. However, the pride in his heart made him immediately throw this thought to the back of his mind. Speaking of which, it was quite interesting. Zheng Mingsheng wasn't a stubborn person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come so far. However, there was an indomitable and proud soul hidden in his body. He didn't think that it was shameful to find a backer through political marriage, but he wouldn't allow himself to do so. He believed that his own ability could do better than finding a backer. Zheng Yujie had inherited this stubbornness from her father. Chapter 565. It was another clear morning. The sun had yet to rise, but the sky was still as bright as a blue mirror. If one looked far into the western horizon, one could still see the pale white moon that had yet to set below the horizon. At this time, the mountain was very humid. The water vapor condensed in the forest and finally accumulated into pearl-sized water droplets. The fluff on the young leaves could no longer hold on to the water droplets and finally rolled off the tall tung trees, falling onto the green leaves and breaking into pieces. Bang! There was a soft muffled sound. A large foot wearing a sports shoe stepped on the dewy leaves, startling the little bugs that were hiding at the roots of the grass and causing them to flee in a hurry. The shadows of the feet crisscrossed, either drawing circles in the horse stance, jumping and kicking, or dragging like a snake, stirring up the quiet forest to become unusually lively. It was Poplar Fruit who was practicing his punches and kicks. There was a commotion in the branches and leaves. In the dense forest, a figure carrying two sabers slowly walked out. As usual, Xiongkahu came more than an hour later than Poplar Fruit. After all, he was getting old. Xiongkahu's body was getting lazier and lazier. He could no longer dance at the sound of the rooster like when he was young. However, even when he was young, he could not wake up at 4 in the morning every day. In this world, the only monster who could almost not sleep and rest was Poplar Fruit. After Xiongkahu walked up the mountain, he was still panting slightly. The two Miaodao on his back were also unfastened and leaned against a big tree beside him. He did not disturb Poplar Fruit. Instead, he curiously watched for a while until Poplar Fruit stopped by himself. "What kind of punch is that?" Xiongkahu asked with a puzzled face. The set of martial arts that Poplar Fruit had just practiced, actually, it was not a set, was very strange. It did not look like any of the ancient Chinese martial arts that Xiongkahu had seen before, but he could still see the shadow of those mainstream fist and kick kung fu in it. Familiar yet unfamiliar fist techniques could be described with such words. If it was a kung fu that he did not recognize, Xiongkahu would not make a fuss. After all, the world was big. What kind of strange kung fu was there? Even if he had been in the martial arts world for decades and had seen many things, he could not guarantee that he had seen all kinds of moves before. The real reason why Xiongkahu couldn't help but ask this question was because Poplar Fruit's kung fu was too simple. A punch was a punch, and a kick was a kick. There was a clear distinction between them. There were no complicated twists and turns. His footwork was only at the beginner level of moving forward and backward, moving left and right. At most, there was a turnaround movement that required some skill. If Xiongkahu had not seen Poplar Fruit practice Taiji Fist and Xingyi Fist before, he would have thought that Poplar Fruit was a clumsy beginner. Poplar Fruit wiped the water droplets off his forehead. They were not sweat, but water droplets from the trees. The mist in the mountains was too thick. His hair was wet and stuck to his forehead. He chuckled and said, "Master, there's no name. I made it up myself." After Xiongkahu started teaching him the Miaodao technique, Poplar Fruit started calling him Master Xiongkahu. He even laughed in his heart because he used to practice according to his dreams. When people asked about his master, he really didn't know how to answer. Now that he had a real master, he didn't have to make up stories to deceive people. Xiongkahu being Poplar Fruit's master, although Xiongkahu did not directly agree, was a blessing for Poplar Fruit. Xiongkahu's ancestral dual Miaodao technique was also famous in the martial arts world. It was just that few people knew about it after he lived in seclusion in the mountains. As for Xiongkahu, he was already very strong. When he was at his peak, he killed so many people in the southwest battlefield that the enemy's command center was in a state of panic. If it was in the past, it would not be an exaggeration to say that he could become a master of his generation with his saber skills. Even though he was over 70 years old, he could still wield the two Miaodao without a single blade touching him. This made Poplar Fruit admire him. You want to create your own martial arts when you haven't even practiced your own martial arts? Xiongkahu finally understood why Poplar Fruit's martial arts looked so childish. He scolded him unhappily, "There are no shortcuts in the path of martial arts. How can you fly when you haven't even learned how to walk?" Xiongkahu lectured Poplar Fruit for more than 10 minutes because he wanted to change Poplar Fruit's scary idea. In his opinion, there were very few martial arts masters in history who could truly establish their own sect. Moreover, the martial arts of today were all mature and it was very difficult to innovate. Instead of wasting time and energy on creating their own martial arts, it was better to practice the martial arts that they had learned until they were solid. Xiongkahu's thinking was more traditional, especially when it came to respecting one's teacher. Heaven, earth, ruler, family, and teacher, teachers were second only to parents and elders. Similarly, they could not be disobeyed. The children in the Miao Stockade village who learned martial arts from him had to abide by the disciples' rules before they entered the sect. Even though Poplar Fruit was not considered an official disciple, he had experienced Xiongkahu's strictness when he first learned martial arts from him. Yes, yes. In front of him, Poplar Fruit could only bite the bullet and listen obediently. After Xiongkahu scolded him to his heart's content, Poplar Fruit did not know whether to laugh or cry as he explained to him. In fact, Poplar Fruit was not as ambitious as Xiongkahu thought. He had never thought of creating his own martial arts and establishing his own sect. He did not even think of innovating. "I just want to create a set of simple martial arts moves to teach Kiki," Poplar Fruit said with a bitter smile. "The ones we practice are too difficult for her to learn." In pursuit of simplicity and practicality, Poplar Fruit's inspiration came from square dancing performed by aunties. Square dancing did not have any fancy or difficult moves. Most of the time, it was just waving and twisting along with the music. However, the reason why square dancing was popular for so long was because it was easy to learn. It could train the body and satisfy aunties' dancing dreams. Therefore, instead of saying that he wanted to teach Kiki martial arts, it was more like he wanted to let Kiki play around with it. In this way, Poplar Fruit forgot about being one with nature and being good at both offense and defense. Poplar Fruit was purely breaking up all the martial arts he had learned. He did not want those that were too difficult to learn, those that were too tiring after a few moves, and those that could easily injure others or hurt others. He only wanted the moves that met his requirements. In the end, he mixed those moves together like a choreographer. Poplar Fruit was still trying and modifying them. That was why Xiongkahu saw Poplar Fruit practicing intermittently like a beginner. "For the sake of the child, you've put in a lot of effort." Xiongkahu reluctantly accepted Poplar Fruit's explanation and said with a slight nod, However, he obviously had no interest in this somewhat playful idea. He picked up the 2 Miaodao and began to urge Poplar Fruit again. Have you practiced the 24 Miaodao today? Hurry up and revise for me. Chapter 566. Even though he wasn't planning on innovating the moves, it was still not easy to create a new kung fu from scratch. Poplar Fruit was more open-minded about this, so he wasn't in a hurry to succeed. After practicing with Xiong Kahu for an hour, Poplar Fruit helped his master carry the saber. The two of them walked side by side towards the Miao Stockade village. By the way, master, I'm planning to go to the county today. Do you want to come along? Poplar Fruit smiled. Why would I go? I've traveled extensively when I was young, so it's not like I haven't seen the world, Xiong Kahu replied casually. However, he suddenly thought of something and turned his head abruptly. He looked into Poplar Fruit's eyes and asked, why do you suddenly want to go to the county? Is there news about the long-distance education you mentioned before? Poplar Fruit nodded and said honestly, there is news. My friend sent a few samples from Beijing to try it out. However, I'm not going to the county today for those computers. Teacher Meng's son is a leader in the county's education bureau, Poplar Fruit explained to Xiong Kahu, who was confused. You want to find Meng Ping? It's useless. Xiong Kahu waved his hand and said dispiritedly, I thought you were going to say something. Don't even think about asking him for help. When his father was still around, he didn't even help much. Even if he's the deputy director now and uses his power to suppress others, he still needs someone to be willing to go up the mountain. Poplar Fruit laughed and said, Master, you misunderstood me again. I'm not asking him to find us a teacher. As long as my long-distance education is successful, the teacher can directly teach the children in the county. How is that possible? If the teacher isn't around, how can we teach? After all, Xiong Kahu was not a young man. Furthermore, he had lived in the mountains for a long time, far away from the high-tech era. It was difficult to explain the logic behind it to him. Last time, Poplar Fruit had tried very hard to explain it to him, but he still did not understand it. Poplar Fruit said helplessly, Yes, master. Don't worry. You'll know when those computers arrive. This time, I went to find Mengping to see if the county can build the basic facilities for the children. This way, the long-distance education I mentioned can operate. Just having a computer was not enough. The village also lacked internet. If there was no internet, how could there be long-distance education? In addition, Poplar Fruit found that the electricity supply in the village was somewhat insufficient. The people in the village did not have high-power appliances such as air conditioners and refrigerators. Usually, they used most of their electricity for lights. Even so, the expensive electricity bill was unacceptable. Therefore, if he wanted the coming equipment to be able to operate and if he wanted his plan to be successful, Poplar Fruit would have to wire up the computer room in the future. He also had to connect the isolated Miao village to the internet. This kind of thing could not be done by Poplar Fruit with money. He needed official support. In this small county, the only person Poplar Fruit could find was the angry director, Meng Ping. Previously, when he was telling the children stories, Poplar Fruit had promised that he would bring the 2 children who answered questions the most diligently and accurately to the county to play. Today, he had found the opportunity. After breakfast, under the envious gazes of a group of small heads, Yang Guo hugged Chi-Chi and placed her on her neck. Then, she brought the 2 children down the mountain with their heads held high like proud little swans. Together with them was a young man from the village and Xiong Xiaolin. Poplar Fruit was going to talk to Meng Ping about something, so the responsibility of bringing the 2 children around the city was handed over to Xiong Xiaolin. Poplar Fruit also considered their safety, so he pulled a young man from the village to be their bodyguard. After more than an hour, they arrived at the foot of the mountain and took the Land Rover. It was much more comfortable after that. It would take another hour to reach the county. Through the rearview mirror, Poplar Fruit looked at the meow young man who was sitting in the back. He smiled and asked, "Jisher, do you know how to drive? I heard from Master Xiong that you used to work in the south." Xiong Jisher was also one of Xiong Kahu's disciples. Poplar Fruit had sparred with him before. His knife skills were good, but his lower body was not very solid. He was easily shaken by Poplar Fruit's fake movements. The luxury car and the comfortable feeling brought by the leather sofa made Xiong Jisher feel a little unreal. He sat in the back and didn't know where to put his hands and feet, for fear of dirtying the car. "Brother Yang, I don't know how to drive," Xiong Jisher said in embarrassment. "Well, I was thinking of leaving the car for you to drive the children to play." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "How about this, I'll drop you off on the side of the road. You take them back to the place and wait for me at 5:00 in the evening. If there's anything urgent, find a public phone and call me." "Are you familiar with the roads in the county?" "Yes." Xiong Jisher quickly replied, "Some time ago, I often went to the county to sell vegetables with my father, so I still know the roads." So, the car drove to the county. Poplar Fruit parked the car in the most prosperous shopping mall in the county. Xiong Jisher and Xiong Xiaolin were fine. The two children who left the mountain for the first time couldn't hold back the joy in their hearts and jumped out of the car. Their black eyes kept looking around. They had grown up in the mountains, so when had they ever seen such a big square and such a tall building? Poplar Fruit got out of the car, took out 500 yuan from his wallet and handed it to Xiong Jisher. "Brother Yang, I can't take it." Xiong Jisher desperately wiped his hands on his trousers and stepped back in embarrassment. Poplar Fruit laughed and stuffed the money into Xiong Jisher's hands without any explanation. He pulled him and said, "Take it, I'm not giving it to you." "Why are you so shy? Take this money and see what the children want to buy. You can also take them to eat something delicious at noon." Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "It's rare for you to come out, so don't be stingy with the money." Poplar Fruit patted Xiong Xiaolin's head and said, "Xiaolin, you have to take good care of your brother and sister. Also, you have to supervise Uncle Jisher. This 500 yuan has to be spent today." "Used up." Xiong Jisher was shocked. 500 yuan was a few months' worth of living expenses for them. It was too extravagant to spend it all in one day. Poplar Fruit said seriously, "Yes, you have to spend it all. If you can't spend it all, I'll deal with you later." Finally, Poplar Fruit gave Xiong Jisher his phone number and left with Kiki. In fact, Chi-Chi had been crying and making a fuss to stay and play with the little sisters and little brothers, but Yang Guo still dragged her into the car. It wasn't that he didn't trust Xiong Jisher, but Poplar Fruit was really worried. Last time, when Kiki was almost taken away by human traffickers, it had left a big psychological shadow on him. In Meng Village, it was fine. The place was small, and there were familiar people everywhere. It was convenient to find her, but in this bustling small town downtown, Poplar Fruit couldn't let Kiki out of his sight. Chapter 567. Before coming, Poplar Fruit had never imagined that it would be so difficult to convince someone. Meng Ping was not only a nationalistic youth, but also a stubborn fellow. His mind was like an old and hard bone. First, he couldn't find a place to chew on it. When he did, he realized that he couldn't chew on it even if all his teeth were broken. Poplar Fruit's request for his help wasn't too much. He just wanted to ask for his help in finding connections to settle the matter of the network and circuit. Of course, Poplar Fruit also hoped that the county could use the salary saved from the lack of a teacher on the mountain. First, they could build the infrastructure. Then, they could pay for the monthly electricity and network fees. Logically speaking, this request was reasonable. After all, the county didn't have the ability to hire a teacher to teach these children. This was the fault of the government. Poplar Fruit had already racked his brains and even used his own money to help the government fill this huge hole. Shouldn't the government do something? Of course, Meng Ping didn't evade this aspect. In fact, he hadn't even thought of this aspect. When Meng Ping heard Poplar Fruit's request, he immediately exploded. No teacher. Online teaching. That's wishful thinking. With a teacher watching and urging them, the younger children won't be able to concentrate on their studies. Do you expect them to have so much self-control to be willing to study? Of course, Poplar Fruit had considered this problem before. However, Poplar Fruit felt that this had nothing to do with having a teacher by their side. It wasn't that the younger children couldn't sit still. For example, Xiong Xiaofeng was an active and playful child. He could play in front of a tablet for an entire day without moving. Therefore, as long as they didn't have ADHD, they had the potential to study hard. There are two ways to get them to sit firmly in front of the bench and listen to the lesson attentively and study earnestly. One is to force them. In reality, this is often the case. For example, many children in the city do not want to learn the piano, but they are still forced by their parents to sit in front of the piano for several hours. The other is to give them sufficient motivation to study. Sometimes, the motivation to learn was supported by rewards. For example, Poplar Fruit had previously proposed that he would bring the children who performed well to the county to play. Later, almost all the children rushed to answer the questions as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Sometimes, the motivation to learn was the student's own will. That would require the content and method of the teacher's lecture to be interesting enough, just like those games and cartoons, to be able to attract the student to study wholeheartedly. The latter was not easy. Even Poplar Fruit himself did not have such strong confidence. However, there was one thing that was worth affirming, and that was that multimedia teaching through computers was much more interesting than the traditional education model of writing on the blackboard that was commonly used in backward small counties. In addition, Poplar Fruit did not want to stick to one method. He hoped to solve the problem of not having a teacher in the classroom by using a multi-pronged approach. First of all, the teaching method naturally had to be innovative, and the content of the lesson also had to be innovative. Secondly, perhaps Teacher Meng's previous reward method could also be used as a reference. For example, giving the students who performed well and ranked at the top of the exam the opportunity to visit the big city or Higashiyama University to encourage them to study hard. Finally, Poplar Fruit would still let Xiong Kahu or let him choose an honest and kind villager to help manage the children. Like a life teacher, he would urge them to listen well in class and complete their homework on time. The plan was linked, and the main purpose was to let all the children in the mountainous areas be able to find a way out of the mountainous areas through learning. Poplar Fruit spent a lot of effort to explain his idea to Meng Ping. During the process, he was constantly questioned and refuted by the stubborn Meng Ping. Okay, even if what you said is right, let's see if it is really as effective as you said. Meng Ping finally reluctantly approved Poplar Fruit's long-distance education, but he was conflicted on another issue. No means no. This is against the rules. Meng Ping actually ran into the room and took out a book called Civil Servant Code of Conduct and flipped it open for Poplar Fruit to read. Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at the sentence that he had specially circled in red. You are not allowed to take advantage of your position as a supervisor, manager, or manager of public funds to use public funds for other purposes without legal approval. From the corner of the book that was flipped open, this guy probably treated this book as a holy book. Even now that he was a deputy bureau chief, he still frequently flipped through this book. Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to be speechless or impressed by such a stubborn person. But, for such a devout and upright person to exist in the filthy officialdom, it was truly a miracle. Perhaps, it wasn't an exaggeration to compare him to the national treasure of the officialdom, the panda. Uncle Meng, I'm not asking you to break the law, Poplar Fruit said helplessly. And, this isn't illegal. You just need to do us a favor and report to the higher-ups to see if this money can be used to pay for our internet and electricity bills. Isn't this also supporting the education in the mountainous areas? It's still not legal approval. If we get the approval of the higher-ups, this won't be considered misappropriation of public funds. Poplar fruit persuaded. Impossible, the higher-ups won't agree. Meng Ping said solemnly. When this money was allocated, it was indicated that it was used for rural grassroots education. How could they let you use it to pay for your internet bills? That's ridiculous. Poplar fruit covered his forehead. He wanted to cry, but no tears came out. He sighed and calmed himself down before saying, Uncle Meng, the government's orders aren't set in stone. We can't hire a teacher right now, so what's the point of having this special fund? Why don't you report it to the higher-ups and ask? Maybe we can really do something special. Later on, Poplar Fruit's mouth was dry, but he still couldn't convince Meng Ping, whose thoughts were already so stubborn. In the end, he was about to give up. But, he accidentally mentioned Teacher Meng's biggest wish when he was alive, and the situation took a turn for the better. It had to be said that Meng Ping was really a filial son, a very filial son. After Poplar Fruit noticed the change in his expression, he used Teacher Meng to persuade him. I believe that Teacher Meng must be looking forward to seeing the children in the mountains continue to go to school next semester. You just need to help report it. You don't need to do anything illegal. Help a bunch of children, right? Teacher Meng will understand and support you. Poplar Fruit patted his chest and said. Meng Ping's expression kept changing. He was constantly struggling in his heart. In the end, he let out a long sigh and didn't insist on his position. He nodded his head and agreed to Poplar Fruit's request. Carrying Kiki out of the Meng residence, not only did Kiki feel dizzy, even Poplar Fruit himself felt exhausted. He wished he could find a big bed and throw himself on it to rest for a few hours. Chapter 568. Poplar Fruit originally planned to invite Meng Ping to dinner with the children in the evening, but he was almost inhumanely refused, so Poplar Fruit had to go to the square in advance to find Xiong Jisher and the others. Papa, that uncle is so fierce. Kiki sat in the passenger seat and couldn't help muttering, let's not go to his place again, okay? The little girl was very resentful that she couldn't play with the little sisters and little brothers. When they were in Meng Ping's house just now, Kiki didn't dare to make a noise, but her constant small movements still exposed her impatience and unhappiness. Poplar Fruit's back was a little red because of her little claws. Poplar Fruit didn't say anything, just let go of the gear handle, smiled and gently touched Kiki's little head. To be honest, he didn't want to go to Meng Ping's place anymore. If he talked to Meng Ping, he would be choked to death sooner or later. When they arrived at the place, Poplar Fruit thought that Xiong Jisher and the others shouldn't be waiting there, so he wanted to find a place to park first. As a result, Kiki, who had sharp eyes, saw Xiong Xiaolin at a glance. Sister Xiaolin. Kiki's cloudy mood turned sunny, and she shouted excitedly. Kiki's baby safety seat was a little high, so even though she was short, she could still see the situation outside the front windshield. Poplar Fruit looked in the direction where Kiki's little hand was pointing, but he found a new situation. Xiong Jisher and the others were in trouble. He saw several young men in robes confronting them face to face. Xiong Jisher rolled up his sleeves, and his tanned face was red because of excitement. Xiong Xiaolin timidly hid behind Xiong Jisher, but she remembered Poplar Fruit's advice, and protected her two younger brothers and sister under her arms. Poplar Fruit raised his eyebrows and said in his heart, this is bad. He was not worried about Xiong Jisher. Although Xiong Jisher's martial arts were ordinary, it was only compared to masters like Poplar Fruit. For ordinary people, even if they used the simplest black tiger steel's heart, Xiong Jisher's strength was enough to make them suffer. Poplar Fruit was worried about Xiong Xiaolin and the other two behind him. No matter how good Xiong Jishir was, he was alone, and there were 4 people in front of him. If they shamelessly attacked the children, Xiong Jishir couldn't stop them. Boom! Poplar Fruit stepped on the road, and the Land Rover burst with a loud roaring sound, and attracted everyone's attention. Poplar Fruit parked the car by the roadside. At this time, he parked the car, and parked the car. Because she was to learn to unbuckle the seatbelt to learn to unbuckle the seat because she was too excited to imitate her father. Because she was to learn to unbuckle to learn to uns, Chi-Chi, stay in the car. Dad, get them in the car. Poplar Fruit told Kiki, and then opened the door to get out of the car, and locked the doors and windows with the remote control. Guishan Province was a small, remote county. It was not like a big city like Yangcheng, so Poplar Fruit's beast-like Land Rover was definitely an eye-catching existence here. Poplar Fruit walked out of the car under everyone's surprised, envious, and even worshipful gazes. His height of 187 meters made him stand out among the crowd, and his chiseled face gave people the illusion that he was a celebrity. How could such a handsome and rich man appear in our county? Many people present couldn't help but have this question in their hearts. However, it seemed that someone was even more arrogant. The leader of the 4 people who had just confronted Poplar Fruit arrogantly turned around and walked towards him, cursing, "You motherfucker. You think you're so great just because you have a car? Come on, hit me to death." Yang Guo frowned and raised her left hand to block the spittle that flew out of his mouth. At this time, Poplar Fruit felt that he had made a mistake in his judgment. Although the other party was dressed like a hooligan, with a shiny golden earring on his ear, he didn't seem to be an ordinary hooligan. This could be seen from the BMW car key that he deliberately showed on his waist. If he guessed correctly, the BMW parked across the road in front of him was his. When he walked in front of them, Poplar Fruit discovered that there were 5 people in front of him. One of them was sitting on the ground, holding his cheek and howling in pain. That Xiong Jishir didn't suffer any losses, he had already taken care of one of them. "Jishir, come here." "What happened?" Poplar Fruit stretched out his hand and pushed the BMW hooligan away, leaving a space for Xiong Jishir. Xiong Jishir hurriedly took Xiong Xiaolin and the other children to Poplar Fruit's side. He looked at Poplar Fruit with a guilty face and said, "Brother Yang, I didn't take good care of." Before he finished speaking, he was interrupted by the BMW hooligan's angry voice, "Motherfucker, you want to leave after hitting people?" He spoke in the local dialect, which was slightly different from the Miao language of the Xiong family village. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit had learned a lot of Miao language in the past 2 days, so he could understand it. You are falsely accusing people." Xiong Jishir said with a red face, "You started it first." "Jishir, what's going on?" Poplar Fruit asked in Mandarin. They picked Xiaolin." Xiong Jishir held back for a while and finally found an alternative word for flirting. Poplar Fruit subconsciously glanced at Xiong Xiaolin, who was blushing. Although Xiong Xiaolin was very thin, and her growth was somewhat poor, she was still very beautiful. Moreover, her actual age was already 14 or 15 years old, and her every move was very mature, so in the eyes of those gangsters, she was still quite beautiful. She is really a femme fatale. Poplar Fruit thought in his heart. He didn't blame Xiong Xiaolin, but he wanted to complain about the experience of these beautiful girls. In the past, Duan Shueching, now Zheng Yujia, Poplar Fruit often encountered similar things when he was with them. "Hey, I don't know which mountain you are from. It is your blessing that Grandpa likes you." The BMW hoodlum proudly said, "If you follow Grandpa, you'll be able to eat and drink well, wear gold and silver." Hearing Yang Guo and the others speak Mandarin, the BMW hoodlum also changed to Mandarin and shouted. Although Miao language was spoken here, there were some subtle differences in every place, especially in the county and the mountains. Even the people in the county secretly called their Miao language official language, and those who didn't speak Miao language like official language would be treated differently. At this time, a lackey behind him came up and pulled his sleeve, whispering a few words to him. The BMW hooligan's face changed, and he subconsciously looked at Poplar Fruit's Land Rover, which had attracted a lot of attention. Although it was a BMW, his BMW was only a little more than 300,000 yuan. As long as one knew about cars, they would know that Poplar Fruit's car was far more valuable than his BMW. TSK, Grandpa fell in love with you at first sight, and thought that you were a pure and innocent girl. It turns out that you were also taken care of by the rich. The BMW hooligan spat on the ground with jealousy and said disdainfully. Chapter 569. The Miao girls gave people the impression that they were warm and generous. This could be seen from the fact that they were not shy about singing folk songs with the young men they loved on various festive occasions. However, this did not mean that they were very casual and open. On the contrary, the Miao girls were as conservative as mummies wrapped in silk cloth when it came to relationships. When they met the person they liked, they could love without any scruples. However, for them, love was loyal and would only bloom once in their lives. Either they did not love at all, or they loved to death. Many of the Miao people's legends said that the love spell originated from their extreme views on love. Of course, with the progress of modernization, most of the Miao girls' views on love had gradually become more rational. However, for Xiong Xiaolin, who grew up in the mountains, she was still a very conservative girl. Hearing the malicious slander of the BMW gangster, Xiong Xiaolin's face turned very pale. She bit her lower lip, and tears began to appear in her beautiful eyes. Poplar Fruit was angry. He strode forward, grabbed the BMW gangster's collar, and said coldly, "Watch your mouth. I'll leave you some dignity." The BMW gangster was grabbed by Poplar Fruit like this, and he suddenly felt ashamed. He used both hands to grab Poplar Fruit's right fist, gritted his teeth, and tried to pry it open. However, the result was naturally like an ant trying to shake a tree. How could he break Poplar Fruit's strength? Like grabbing a child, he pulled the BMW gangster's heels off the ground. Only then did Poplar Fruit fiercely push him towards his companions behind him. As if they were picking up a rare treasure, the BMW gangster's lackeys quickly rushed up to support him, and for a moment, they huddled together. Looking at him with disdain, Poplar Fruit turned around and patted Xiong Jishir, who was still standing there with his fist clenched, and said, "Let's go, ignore him." Walking to the front of the car, Poplar Fruit opened the door of the back seat and motioned for Xiong Xiaolin and the two children to get in first. Seeing Xiong Xiaolin's sister climb in, Kiki, who struggled to turn her little head, grinned happily and shouted happily, "Ada, sister." However, Xiong Xiaolin was in a terrible mood. She forced a smile and nodded at Kiki. "MD. You want to run away after hitting someone? Don't you know whose territory this is?" The BMW gangster rolled up from the ground, and the people who pushed him rushed up and surrounded Poplar Fruit's car. One of them even grabbed the back door to prevent Poplar Fruit from closing it. Poplar Fruit held back the anger in his heart. He stared into the eyes of the BMW gangster and coldly asked, "What do you want? What do you want?" "Hee, you hit me, and you're asking me what I want?" The BMW hoodlum tilted his face, squinted at Poplar Fruit, spread out his hands, and asked like a madman. "Did I hit you?" Yang Guo didn't open his car door. He turned around and rolled up his sleeves as he questioned Xiao Yu. Other than the BMW hoodlum who was looking at Poplar Fruit, no one else noticed that Poplar Fruit's eyes were actually emitting a fierce murderous aura. He learned this from Xiong Kahu. Xiong Kahu told him that in a close combat battle, courage was the key. Whoever retreated first would lose for sure. Therefore, every time Xiong Kahu struck with his saber, he would use his murderous aura to disturb the enemy's mind. After experiencing a storm of blood, his eyes widened, and the pressure he gave off was not inferior to a tiger that dominated the forest. Poplar Fruit had only learned less than half of this. After all, his experience was not as rough as Xiongkahu's, and he was unable to gather enough murderous aura to make people tremble. However, even so, Poplar Fruit's eyes still made the BMW hoodlum feel as if he had fallen into an ice cave. It was as if the tall man in front of him had turned into a terrifying monster. He was so scared that he backed off in panic, and even tripped over himself. There were a few sneers from the crowd, and this made the BMW hoodlum feel as if he had lost all his face. "Motherfucker, what do I pay you for?" The BMW hoodlum pushed away the lackeys who wanted to help him up, and scolded, "You guys just want to see me make a fool of myself, right?" There was a clever one who went back to the car and grabbed a baseball bat. He screamed as he rushed up from the side door, and swung the bat at Poplar Fruit's head. However, this idea of his was wrong. Who was Poplar Fruit? He did not need to look to feel the wind of the baseball bat. However, this speed was too slow. As he gradually got used to the meowdow that was as fast as lightning, Poplar Fruit was disdainful of the baseball bat that he saw from the corner of his eye. No one saw clearly that Poplar Fruit's right hand was like a snake coming out of a hole. He grabbed the baseball bat in the air, and then used a little bit of Tai Chi to remove the force on the baseball bat. Before Poplar Fruit could make a second move, Xiong Jisher, who had jumped out of the car, roared and kicked the guy who attacked him to the side. Just like that, the baseball bat had changed hands before anyone could react. Yang Guo was still unwilling to cause a dispute in this unfamiliar place. He grabbed the angry Xiong Jisher who wanted to go up and kick him a few more times and pulled him back. Poplar Fruit half held and half carried the baseball bat, and the bat was slanted towards the ground. He walked step by step towards the BMW hoodlum. What Yang Guo didn't expect was that the BMW thug was a little flustered at first, but later on, she didn't know if he didn't want to embarrass himself anymore, but he actually raised his head and arrogantly pressed forward. "Come on, hit me." The BMW hoodlum's chest was pressed by Poplar Fruit's baseball bat, but he was not afraid at all. He shouted in a sharp voice, "Try hitting me if you dare." He deserved a beating. However, although Poplar Fruit was very angry, he still held back. He was in the right before, but if he really hit him, he would be the one hitting others. Seeing that Poplar Fruit did not move, the BMW hoodlum became more and more arrogant. He shouted, "Come on." "What? You don't dare." The BMW hoodlum was addicted to it. He pointed his finger at Poplar Fruit's head and poked it in the air, as if he was really bullying him. "Come on. Try it." At this moment, he suddenly pushed the baseball bat away and came over. He lowered his voice and laughed. "Do you know who my father is? Let me tell you, if you touch me, you won't be able to walk out of Lidong." Poplar Fruit frowned and pushed the BMW hoodlum's head away. Looking at the shameless face with powder and the strong smell of perfume, Poplar Fruit felt disgusted. "Ah!" A sharp scream suddenly resounded throughout the entire square. Under the gaze of Poplar Fruit and the onlookers, the BMW hoodlum wailed. It seemed that Poplar Fruit had used a lot of strength. He slowly fell to the ground and then rolled a few times exaggeratedly. "Call the police, call the police. You hit me." Chapter 570. If it wasn't for the national football team, this was probably the worst dive in history. Poplar Fruit was stunned. For a moment, he even doubted his own strength. If he could do this with a gentle push, he would have been able to shake the earth. However, the BMW gangster's words made Poplar Fruit vigilant. "Call the police." Although the BMW gangster's lackeys were timid, they didn't dare to step forward when they saw Poplar Fruit and Xiong Jisher, who were so strong. However, they were good at intimidating others. One of them took out his mobile phone, dialed a number, and jokingly pointed at Poplar Fruit and said, "You're dead." A strong dragon couldn't beat a local snake. Poplar Fruit felt a little uneasy. He remembered what the BMW gangster had just said, "Do you know who my father is?" This kind of sentence was usually followed by something like, "My father is Li Gang." However, before he could say it, he was pushed away by Poplar Fruit. Xiong Jisher had never seen such a situation. When he heard that the other party was going to call the police, he panicked and rushed forward to grab the man's mobile phone. "Hey!" The other gangsters didn't just stand there and watch. They surrounded Xiong Jisher and separated him, preventing him from contacting the person who was making the call. Sharp Hmong language curses came one after another. Poplar Fruit was afraid that Xiong Jisher would be at a disadvantage, so he pulled him back. It was obviously a false accusation, but the other party had a "you're dead" attitude, which made Poplar Fruit's eyelids twitch. He was almost sure that the other party must have a lot of connections in the local area. The car couldn't leave. It was blocked by the other party's people. Poplar Fruit couldn't sit still. He frowned, pushed Xiong Jisher into the car, and then took out his mobile phone to make a call. In this small county town, Poplar Fruit only knew Meng Ping. Although he felt that Meng Ping was very unreliable, he could only give him a phone number. After the call went through, Poplar Fruit briefly told Meng Ping what had happened. In the end, before he was arrested by the police, he was questioned by Meng Ping for a few minutes. Finally, after Poplar Fruit repeatedly assured him that they were not doing anything illegal, Meng Ping put down the phone and rushed over. However, when Meng Ping arrived, he could only go to the Public Security Bureau to find someone. It turned out that the BMW gangster was the son of the county's third in command, the executive deputy county magistrate. Moreover, because his father was a local official, he had been quietly operating for decades. His prestige was not below that of the first and second in command. The police came quickly after receiving the call. What made Poplar Fruit angry was that they didn't even ask what was going on. They just wanted to arrest him. Could it be that their family owns the Public Security Bureau? When Poplar Fruit saw that the leading police officer had his arm around the other party's shoulder, he clenched his fist. It wasn't the first time he had seen this scene. Previously, when he was framed and imprisoned by Duan Shueching's perverted leader, Gu Shida, he had encountered the same situation. There was a group of children in the car behind him. Poplar Fruit couldn't retreat, so he confronted the other party for a long time. Poplar Fruit's strength was too great. Even though Poplar Fruit didn't make a move, the few of them couldn't handle Poplar Fruit alone. In the end, in order not to make the situation worse, the police took a step back and let Poplar Fruit drive the car to the Public Security Bureau. Meng Ping hurried to the Public Security Bureau. Poplar Fruit was still at the entrance of the Public Security Bureau, glaring angrily at the BMW gangster. Behind him, Xiong Xiaolin and several frightened children were tightly pulling Poplar Fruit's clothes. Just now, for some reason, the BMW thugs suddenly went crazy. They actually shamelessly wanted to go around Yang Guo to flirt with Xiong Xiaolin. This made Yang Guo's anger level instantly explode. Poplar Fruit grabbed the BMW gangster's shoulder with one hand and pushed him hard. This time, the BMW gangster didn't need to pretend. He was directly pushed to the ground by Poplar Fruit. Moreover, his buttocks hit the ground first. He covered his buttocks in pain and wailed. The corners of the eyes of the policemen behind them twitched. They didn't dare to laugh, but they couldn't help it. Xiong Jisher didn't have the strength of Poplar Fruit. He had already been pressed down by the police and handcuffed to the chair. However, he didn't give in and glared at the other party. His eyes were about to spit fire. In fact, the policemen were also having a headache. Although they supported the BMW gangster because of his background, they really didn't dare to do anything to Poplar Fruit. They could only surround him and persuade him not to do anything. What made them hesitate was Poplar Fruit's Land Rover. In the economically backward Guishan province, people with power might not necessarily be rich, but rich people must be very powerful. The Land Rover driven by Poplar Fruit was several times more expensive than the BMW gangster's low-spec BMW. Who knew if Poplar Fruit was pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger? No matter what, the policeman secretly muttered, we can't offend him too much. We should leave him a way out so that we can meet again in the future. After Meng Ping arrived, he saw the situation between Poplar Fruit and the police. He panicked and rushed over. He even deliberately scolded Poplar Fruit and apologized on his behalf. Poplar Fruit was angry. He pulled Meng Ping and said, "Why are you apologizing? Can't you figure out the situation? Is this our fault?" It had to be said that although Meng Ping was stubborn like a piece of wood, he was still worthy of praise in some aspects. After carefully understanding the ins and outs of the matter, Meng Ping became angry. He used to be a teacher. Facing the BMW gangster who harassed my daughter, he righteously said to the policeman, "How are you, policeman? The person who should be arrested is obviously him. As policeman, you don't enforce the law impartially. I will tell Bureau Chief Lu Guoyang to let you learn the discipline of the police force." "Who are you? Why are you so arrogant?" The BMW gangster sneered and asked. "Me? I am Meng Ping, the Deputy Bureau Chief of the Education Bureau." Meng Ping said proudly, "Of course, I used to be a glorious teacher of the people." Poplar Fruit wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. He was shocked by Meng Ping's self-introduction. If he could, he would rather not call this guy who felt so good about himself over. Ha! Ha! As if he had heard the funniest joke in the world, the BMW gangster held his stomach and squatted on the side, laughing crazily. "Are you fucking sent by monkeys to tease me? A small deputy bureau chief dares to speak so arrogantly? I don't use my power to oppress people. I use reason to convince people." Meng Ping righteously said, "You were wrong in this matter. MD. Since when was it your turn to teach me a lesson?" The BMW gangster suddenly rushed up and pushed Meng Ping to the ground. He pretended to vomit twice on the ground and cursed, "Do you know how annoying you are? If you have nothing to do, get out of my way. Do you know who my dad is? Stand firm. Let me tell you, my dad's name is Liang Xingtao." The BMW gangster laughed arrogantly. "A small deputy bureau chief like you can be fired at any time." Chapter 571. Although Yang Guo had a headache due to Meng Ping's childish words, seeing him being pushed down, Yang Guo still glared at the BMW gangster and stepped forward to help Meng Ping up. However, Meng Ping had no intention of backing down. After he stood up, he pulled away Poplar Fruit's hand and scolded, "Your father is a deputy county magistrate. Do you think you can do whatever you want? If a prince breaks the law, a commoner will be punished as well." Meng Ping stepped forward and said with his head held high, "If you make a mistake, you will be punished as well." His voice wasn't loud, but it was loud and clear like a bell. Moreover, his fearless strides carried the heroic aura of, "The rage of a gentleman causes blood to splatter everywhere." Finally, someone couldn't sit still in front of the Public Security Bureau. Lu Guoyang, who was mentioned by Meng Ping, hurriedly walked down from the office building. He saw the BMW gangster and blurted out, "Young Master Liang." However, Lu Guoyang was a cunning old fox. He didn't rush forward to deal with the dispute, but asked someone to clarify the situation. Actually, he didn't need to ask, as he knew that it was young Master Liang who was causing trouble. He asked because he wanted to know the background of the people who were confronting young Master Liang. After listening to his subordinate's explanation, Lu Guoyang frowned. This matter was really tricky. Poplar Fruit was so mysterious, and he was a foreigner driving an expensive Land Rover. No one knew where Poplar Fruit came from. Xiong Jisher, who was handcuffed to the chair, had his background figured out in half an hour. He was a local from a village, so he seemed easy to bully. However, when Lu Guoyang heard that Xiong Jishir was good at fighting, and that it took a few policemen to hold him down, his heart skipped a beat. He couldn't help but ask Xiong Jishir, "Little brother, which village are you from?" He spoke in Miao language to make Xiong Jishir lower his guard. Xiong Jishir's eyes were fixed on the outside, looking angry and unwilling. Hearing Lu Guoyang's question, he answered without hesitation, "Xiong family." As expected. Others might not know, but as the director of the Public Security Bureau of this small county, how could Lu Guoyang not know of Xiong Kehu's existence? Before Xiong Kehu joined the army, he was infamous in the area. When the soldiers came back, their murderous look made several people pee their pants when they walked on the streets. 30 years ago, Xiong Kehu's name could even stop children from crying at night. However, after Xiong Kehu returned to the mountain, he rarely left the mountain, and his influence slowly faded. However, Lu Guoyang was not as ignorant as the masses. He had some cases of civil disputes that told him that even though Xiong Kehu had returned to the garden and field residence, he was still the same god of death. At the end of the 80s, Xiong Kehu rushed to the county government alone and dragged the county magistrate to his village to seek justice for the Xiong village. In the mid-90s, there was a drought in Guishan province. Due to a dispute over a water source, the Xiong family got into a fight with 2 villages downstream. Xiong Kehu led the Miao people and killed twice their number of Han Chinese farmers. During the dispute, both sides suffered casualties, but the Han Chinese lost the most. Many of them had their tendons severed by Xiong Kehu. Although he did not kill them, severing their tendons meant that their hands were crippled. Even so, Xiong Kehu was not arrested. On one hand, it was because the mountains were high and the rivers were far away, and the villagers were poor, so no one dared to arrest him. On the other hand, Xiong Kehu's achievements in the army were too outstanding, and there were people who were careless about him. There were many cases of armed fights, but the Xiong village was never at a disadvantage. In the past 5 to 6 years, these cases almost never happened again. Moreover, the people of the Xiong village were more restrained and rarely caused trouble, so Lu Guoyang didn't think of Xiong Kehu for a long time. However, Lu Guoyang still had a headache whenever he heard the name of the Xiong village. He didn't want to go up against that hot-tempered and protective old man. The last one was Meng Ping. Although Meng Ping was only a deputy director of the Education Bureau, his name was well known in the small county government. Putting it this way, Meng Ping was a weirdo in the bureaucracy. With his stubborn and easily offending personality, Meng Ping could only be a teacher until his death. But who told him to have a good father? Teacher Meng had been a teacher his whole life. He used to teach in the county, but later went to the mountains. Teacher Meng didn't dare say that he had students all over the world, but the students he taught could be found in every corner of Guishan province. One of them was a high-ranking official in the provincial capital of Guishan province. He especially remembered Teacher Meng's kindness and helped Teacher Meng's family without sparing any effort. Meng Ping was promoted from a normal language teacher to a civil servant in the county's education bureau. Then he escorted Teacher Meng all the way until Teacher Meng passed away. That person came back to attend the memorial service and asked the county to give Meng Ping a compensation. Thus, there was the current deputy director Meng Ping. Although Meng Ping was usually too straightforward and offended many leaders, no one was willing to touch him. In the end, they just turned a blind eye. Why are they together? Lu Guoyang looked at the tense situation outside and had a headache. Young Master Liang, Deputy Director Meng, Aya, why are you arguing? It's really like the flood rushing against the Dragon King's temple. We're all on the same side, calm down, calm down. Lu Guoyang didn't know how many rounds his thoughts, but he still pushed the door open and said with a smile. Who's on the same side with him? The BMW hoodlum said unhappily. Uncle Lu, you came. This guy even said that he wanted you to teach me a lesson. Also, these guys just hit me. Here, Captain Wu can help me testify. The BMW hoodlum pulled out a policeman with a bitter smile from the crowd and patted his shoulder. When Captain Wu heard Lu Guoyang's tone, he knew that his boss didn't want to help either side, and even wanted to make peace. Therefore, he secretly wanted to hide at the back, but he was still dragged out by young Master Liang without any explanation. Deputy Director Lu, hello. Meng Ping saluted him, neither servile nor overbearing. Then, in front of everyone, he started to criticize the policeman who had just left the team. Deputy Director Lu, I think that the police team needs to do some ideological work. Meng Ping said loudly, your subordinates were actually ordered by a playboy. Not only did they mediate the dispute unreasonably, but they also inverted black and white, and framed good people. Lu Guoyang's eyebrows twitched, and his smile froze. Although he had heard about it before, this was the first time he experienced Meng Ping's straightforwardness, and he couldn't take it. If it weren't for the fact that he had too many scruples, Lu Guoyang would have immediately changed his position to deal with Poplar Fruit and the others. Poplar Fruit wasn't stupid. He knew that although Meng Ping's words were straightforward, he had undoubtedly offended the deputy director in front of him. He finally couldn't take it anymore, and pulled Meng Ping aside. He softly advised, Uncle Meng, stop talking. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.